Hi, I'm Nat.
I'm Erin.
And I'm Shy.
And you're listening to Metamashina, a bi-weekly podcast on genre fiction from the feminine gaze. So, to begin, how are we this week? Let's start with you, Shy.
I'm currently a little bit drunk. Sorry.
I should preface this by saying that we are all a little bit toasty. We had a very
It's
long
been a
week.
bad week.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Well, I'm currently ODing on Halloween candy and wine. It's gone straight to my head. So I will try to speak clearly this episode. It might not work because this is my second glass of wine and it's pretty good.
And she's a lightweight.
Yeah. But anyways, no, I'm super. Otherwise than that, I've been super tired, dead on my feet. Right. I'm fantasizing about sleeping and then dreaming about sleeping while I sleep. And I'm also Christmas shopping right now, and I'm about to start the blackout for all things Star Wars because we're about to enter spoiler period.
Danger zone.
And I don't want to know everything before I go into the theater. I want to be slightly surprised if Kylo kisses Rey. That would be nice.
We can only hope.
If we can only hope.
All right, Erin, how has your week been?
I am hanging in there. My personal life is imploding a little bit, so I have not been blogging about Star Wars or anything at all, but I am clinging to this podcast and seeing you guys in Vancouver in December for dear life because I don't have a whole lot else to hang on to right now. So I'm just looking forward to, I don't know, New Year's resolutions or something, just something different. I just need a reprieve from this. So that's why I've had wine tonight, because I have lots of external factors affecting me right now. So
yes.
Apologies.
It's very
but
much
not
deserved.
really
Sorry.
What about you, Nat?
So it was my birthday last week, and it's the day after Halloween, so I always go a little bit fucking crazy. I pulled together 2 different costumes.
We saw the snaps. I think I counted 5 costumes in total.
Well, yeah, maybe 2 costumes, but 3 variations or whatever. But yeah, I went as Beetlejuice 2 nights, and then I had a Game of Thrones party on Saturday when I went as Marjorie Tyrell, and I pulled that costume together in 48 hours, and it was a little bit intense.
Dude, that costume was fucking amazing.
Thank you.
It looked really good.
Gosh, I wish I could do that in 48 hours. I definitely can't, but it was beautiful.
Yeah, I'm lucky I have a friend that goes to the Goodwill to the bin sections, and she always goes and finds shit. She's got magical powers of thrifting.
At first, I thought it was a Snapchat filter because it was so well done. I was like, oh, she's wearing the queen filter, But that was...
God, if only there was one of those. I would use it every day. But no, I wish. I'm going to rant a little bit here because I just saw Thor Ragnarok last night, and it was kind of the perfect capper of my week of shame.
I know you've been waiting for that for 6 months.
I really want to see that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So Taika Waititi is one of my favorite people of all time because I love What We Do in the Shadows and
such a good movie.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Is that the vampire one?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
The Vampire Roommates, and he wrote and directed it and starred in it, which I think is great. So he's also directing and partially writing and starring in Thor Ragnarok, and it's just so fucking hilarious. Every moment is an opportunity for a joke that's awkward and funny, and they take it, and it's perfect. And they actually stick really true to the characters in a way that I never thought that they would. I had very low expectations for it to be, Marvel movies or whatever, right? I'm a huge MCU fan, but I don't always have high expectations, especially after Age of Ultron. So, but to say that, it actually kind of redeemed it for me too, because they did such a good job with even Bruce Banner and the Hulk. I love his character. I know it's shameless, but currently going into Loki and Valkyrie shipping. The ship name is Valkyrie. Valkyrie is a really great character. She's a drunk, and she
Aren't we all?
A woman after my own heart.
Yeah, seriously, at this time in my life, I can relate to her completely. So, yeah, no, she's perfect. Tessa Thompson does an amazing job at her, and she kicks ass, and she's canonically bi, actually, which is really cool to me.
Nice.
That they had to unfortunately cut the scene where they really outed that, but they definitely have established in canon, and Loki's gender fluid in like comic canon, so there's a lot of opportunity for wonderful fic out of that, right? Anyway, I'm going to shut up now. Except to say that I really, 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 really love Hela, and she's like my favorite character in the MCU now, and I cannot wait to cosplay her because Cate Blanchett is like a goddess, and she's so beautiful.
Dude, she has such a fucking extra helmet. I would totally wear it.
Yes, it would be difficult to create.
It's stuck in the doorway, but like if you avoided doorways entirely, or maybe if you walked sideways.
No, I mean she takes that thing on and off like a fucking queen. Like one minute she's got her hair down, the next minute she's putting her helmet on, next minute she's got her hair down, next minute she's putting her helmet on. Like for the whole movie. So like I can definitely go as like, low key Hela, which is totally fine. So
I haven't watched a Marvel movie in probably 3 or 4 years.
As a MCU stan, I cannot even imagine how you would not be able to watch a movie.
I went before we turn this into a Marvel Universe
we'll stop.
episode. No, I was gonna say the last one I went to go see was actually Age of Ultron, and I fell asleep.
That's probably for the better. That movie should have been something I fell asleep in, but I did not. I saw all of it.
It was. I can barely remember it, except that one of the Olsen sisters was in it, maybe?
Yeah, Elizabeth Olsen is Scarlet Witch.
Elizabeth Olsen.
She's a great
Oh, yeah! That's right. Okay. And there was like terrible like Eastern European accents and like something floating in the sky, I think.
Yep.
Was that it?
That was the city of Sokovia.
Okay, yeah.
Today's topic is a subverted take on the old as dirt, stolen bride, and Beauty and the Beast tropes of folklore. And we call this one the Sorcerer Husband. In these tales, a woman who considers herself unattractive or undesirable is partnered with a more handsome, magically inclined, or cursed partner who she cannot imagine being partnered with. Over the course of the story, it is revealed this impossible man has found himself very much in love with the girl, usually from the beginning, even if he cannot admit it. And all of this is thanks to her own cunning and her true beauty, which is both within and without. So.
Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. My favorite books. I love this genre.
Yeah. So as women, this is a fantasy rarely explored in folklore, due to the fact that women are usually prizes because of their beauty and innocence, which this character usually does not have, thank goodness. So here we have strong-headed women who, while feminine, do not hew to the conventionally desirable traits of their sex. They almost always have a secret magic that must take time and a caring tutelage to uncover. So these stories are often conflated with the Beauty and the Beast trope as a kind of gender-bent version, but they're in fact not. They're a retelling of the ancient Greek myth of Eros and Psyche, and they should be differentiated from a gender-bent Beauty and the Beast because those stories are actually pretty exceedingly rare. We have a Russian fairy tale called The Frog Princess, which involves an Ivan. If you've listened to our Kolshay episode, you know all about Ivan, and he's betrothed to a magical frog who is transformed into a beautiful princess. But no, true gender reversal of the animal bridegroom usually falls in the category of the wild bride who cannot be tamed and who must be returned to her home. So it's like the Selkie myth or Melusine or the German romance ending, which is based off of Melusine, which are basically you take this magical creature out of her environment and she must eventually return to it. She may have a child in the human realm, but she will have to reconcile her relationship with her, human spouse in order to take care of that child.
Damn, you have such an in-depth knowledge of fucking mythos that I feel.
No, I just read a lot of fairy tales.
My God.
Yeah, like did you even have to look that up, or did you just know off the top of your head? And I know it's because you just knew off the top of your head. You didn't.
I still looked up stuff. I had to remember what the green serpent was from. So like I'll go here into the green serpent because this is the most important thing that relates to our thing. So
you're such an encyclopedia of mythology.
I know. I'm sorry. So, in the late 17th century, the Eros and Psyche myth was rewritten within the French salon kind of court, and they grew really excited about it. And so, one of the really most famous female storytellers of that time, Madame de Aulnay, created a story called The Green Serpent. And so, this is a retelling of the Eros and Psyche myth. And in this story, a female child is cursed by a evil fairy to become the ugliest in the world. Her little sister is the most beautiful. It sucks. She has a horrible life. She goes out on her own in exile from her family because nobody can stand her because she's so ugly. It's really, really sad.
Aww.
But she, meets this wonderful green dragon who basically says that he loves her, and they develop this relationship where he's like, you cannot see me. Long story short, he basically secrets her away to a castle, marries her in secret where she has not seen him, so she doesn't know that he's the green dragon that she's seen earlier. And then, of course, in the Eros and Psyche myth, she has to reveal him, and she reveals him, and then he is cursed, and they have to spend years getting back together, and she has to go down into hell in order to break the curse. So it's a pretty interesting story, really good retelling of it, but I think it really speaks to the fact that the heroine considers herself ugly, but the dragon does not. And even though he was a very handsome man before he was turned into a dragon. So I'm going to quote from him.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, it's us.
I was just going to say it's a wonderful female power fantasy, which is why I love it to pieces.
Yeah, it is. It is so much. So to quote from the Green Serpent early on when he first is enticing her to marry him when he has not revealed himself to her, he says, "I have seen you, madam," answered the invisible being, "and have not found you what you represent yourself. Be it for your person, your merit, or your misfortunes. I repeat, I adore you, but my respectful and timid affection obliges me to conceal myself." And so I think that kind of speaks to the whole genre as a whole, because you have this she considers herself ugly, but she's probably not, intelligent woman, cursed but alluring magical man-beast, and then there's always the terrifying mother figure with sexual undertones as an antagonist. So
yep,
it's a sacred dynamic in female-centered narratives, and one I believe will always hold an appeal for us women, especially those of us who wish to be known and loved for our internal characteristics more so than our external.
Yeah. Yep, it's fantastic.
And we'll also discuss the role of domestic fantasy and how this relates to women's dreams of being appreciated for their emotional labor and their physical labor within the role of caretaker and, homemaker. This is something that's kind of important for all of us because we are all socialized and raised to be the domestic types.
Well, I think the two genres are actually interlinked in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, I think the Sorcerer Husband, like the trope that you're talking about, is basically the origin of domestic fantasy, right? Like, they're so closely linked in terms of what happens. And sometimes they're a little bit different, but...
Yeah, there's actually a funny parallel in there. Okay, so usually in those stories that I was relating to, like the Green Serpent, she's a princess, so she's never had to do anything in her entire life. But when she is basically trying to break the curse, she has to do all these domestic tasks, and she's helped by spiritual helpers. So it's about learning how to take care of the home and the environment. And you're usually being taught by the antagonist that's an older female that's basically ruling you to do these tasks. So it does fit into the domestic fantasy genre quite a bit, just in a different way.
Yeah. Definitely.
All right, so to begin, today we will discuss the novel Uprooted by Naomi Novik. It was published in 2015, and it's a standalone novel. It's about a girl who is chosen as a serving girl and magical apprentice of a somewhat immortal sorcerer. So Uprooted won the 2016 Nebula Award for Best Novel and the Mythopoeic Award. It was also nominated for the 2016 Hugo Award for Best Novel. So this is some pretty big praise for it. And even though it may kind of be conflated with a YA genre, a young adult genre, it is absolutely an adult book.
I think it's considered new adult.
New adult, yep. So Erin, do you want to explain it?
Sure. The reason that we're doing this episode is because I had wrecked this on a previous episode that we did because it's one of my favorite novels. Uprooted was originally recommended to me by one of my good friends who shares a lot of my same tastes and interests, and she and I tend to like the same things, and we both read a lot of young adult, new adult, among other things, and she said, "I think you'll like this," so I gave it a go. And turns out that Uprooted is sort of a cult hit among the young adult and new adult readers. It's definitely a well-written novel, and I really like it. I really appreciate the story, but I think also... So I think one of the reasons that Uprooted is such a cult hit among new adult and young adult readers is because it does explore some adult themes that a lot of the more young adult genre aimed at, early and mid-year teenagers don't explore. And so I think people appreciate that it's a bit darker, it has more sexual content, and, that's why I like it. Uprooted is the story of Agnieszka, and Agnieszka is a klutzy teenage girl living in an isolated valley surrounded by an enchanted evil forest. And the land in which she lives is called Polnia, and that is sort of a stand-in for medieval fantasy Poland. Her village, like a lot of the villages in the area, is sort of administered and protected by the wizard Sarkin, and he goes by the moniker the Dragon. So once every 10 years, the dragon comes down to the valley to kidnap a teenage girl as a tribute. And the villagers think this is for sexual purposes, but it later turns out that he's kidnapping the girls for magical purposes instead. But the novel begins with Agnieszka. She's a dragonborn girl, and so that means that she was born in the year. So the dragon picks a new girl every 10 years to take away to his tower, where and he's tasked with protecting the valley against the evil forest, and he takes this girl as tribute every 10 years. And so every 10 years he comes down from his tower to take a girl from the valley and take her back to his tower. And Agnieszka is born in the year of the dragon, so she's one of the girls who will ultimately stand in front of Sarkin to be selected. However, Agnieszka sort of knows as she's growing up that she will never be taken by the dragon because she's not conventionally attractive, she's not talented, she's not graceful, she doesn't have any attributes that she thinks the dragon will desire. And the people of the valley think that, well, they say that the dragon always chooses the girl who is the most special. And of course, she believes that it will be her best friend, Cassia. And Cassia is everything Agnieszka is not. She's beautiful, she's talented, she's graceful. And everybody has sort of assumed that the dragon will come and take Cassia away. And so the novel begins with Agnieszka preparing herself to lose Cassia, her best friend, but also being grateful, knowing that it won't be her and that her mother and her family won't ever have to cope with her loss. And she's never mentally prepared herself for being whisked away by the dragon. But of course, when it comes time for the choosing, the tribute, if you will, the dragon chooses Agnieszka. And so this comes as a surprise to the protagonist. And she ultimately becomes kidnapped by the dragon and goes to live with him in his tower and learns that he is a sorcerer. And over the course of the story, Agnieszka learns that she as well possesses these powers and has the capacity to be a sorceress. And eventually she and Sarkin develop a relationship and team up against the evil forest, the wood as it's called in universe. So yeah, it is sort of a classic Beauty and the Beast sort of tale because she's basically abducted from society, goes to live with this monster, you know, as she's perceived him, because in the novel, in the beginning, she talks about, you know, the dragon has never done anything like wrong to us, but we all hate him because he takes someone away. Like it's, you know, she's basically been preparing herself for Cassia's metaphorical death for her whole life. And she has a lot of resentment towards the dragon. And so it's sort of an enemies to lovers sort of story.
Oh,
and
yeah.
and over the course of the story you learn that, you know, maybe Sarkin isn't the monster you always thought he was, Agnieszka, but also she learns that, you know, maybe she wasn't as boring and bland as she thought she was either.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's important to note that when everyone kind of knows that he's going to come and steal a girl, but the fate of the girls is actually quite interesting, right? They move on. They become, you know, grander, bigger versions of themselves and leave their rural life.
She makes a big point of, so every girl that the dragon selects goes and lives with the dragon for a decade. And nobody really knows why. I mean, everybody assumes that it's just because he's some chauvinist that wants a woman prize that he keeps for 10 years. And then once she gets too old or whatever, he will send her on her way with a dowry. And the thing is, none of these women ever come back. None of them ever rejoin society. So even when they are free from the tower, Agnieszka sort of waxes poetic about how they all go to court or they all move away to faraway lands and take their money with them. And none of them can ever really reacclimate to society. And so, you know, there's this concept that all of these women who do go away to live with Sarkin in his tower are fundamentally changed and never really come home afterwards.
Yeah, and there's like, if I can interject here too, when we're talking about the themes in Uprooted, both with the Sorcerer's Husband, with domestic fantasy, and with other books too. I mean, we won't talk about it a lot in this episode because it really does deserve an episode all on its own. But in a lot of the ways, Uprooted reminds me of Meredith Ann Pierce's Dark Angel trilogy. And it's a book from, I can't remember the exact year, but it's been a while now.
It's from the early 80s, actually. Or
yeah, early 80s. Yeah, it's basically Nat and I's Bible. It's so good. So Uprooted and Dark Angel's trilogy are very different books. I mean, Dark Angel deals with child abuse and depression and really dark themes, actually. While Uprooted, in my opinion, deals with themes of ancestry and belonging and being comfortable with yourself. But they have very similar plot elements because they're based off the same tropes, right? So like in Dark Angel, like Uprooted, there's this girl called Ariel. I mean, notice that names both start with A too. That's me getting a little bit conspiratorial. But anyways, so there's this girl in Dark Angel, there's this girl called Ariel who lives in a valley that's haunted by this monstrous magical being called the Dark Angel. And the Dark Angel steals beautiful women to turn them into brides. And Ariel, who is a slave to a beautiful mistress, like Agnieszka, or what, I can't pronounce her name.
Agnieszka?
Like Agnieszka with Kasia. And Kasia, like Kasia with Kasia, she doesn't think she's going to be stolen because she's got a beautiful mistress, and the Dark Angel always goes for beauty, or the special ones, right? Like she's small and mousy, and she doesn't think anyone would want her, and this lack of importance protects her in the beginning. But like Sarkhan with Agnieszka, the Dark Angel does want Ariel, and he does kidnap her eventually. And like Sarkhan, he turns out to be this deeply misunderstood man. Actually, much more dark than Sarkhan. I should mention that though. Who is deeply misunderstood.
Yeah, he does
living alone in a tower. He is a little bit
and suck
he
their
is a little
souls
bit
out.
problematic.
So,
Yeah, he's a little bit more problematic than Sarkhan, but it's the same themes, right?
Yeah.
So he's living alone in the tower, but nothing but the ghosts of his former lovers to keep him company. And in Uprooted, like Dark Angel, you've got that older mother figure who's got the weird sexual undertones, because Ariel must also face off against a more powerful female figure as the final villain. And this female figure often cannot die through conventional means, and they're often twisted or broken by love or lack thereof. So I won't get into the very ending of Dark Angel or Uprooted because they're both really great books, and everyone should read both of them. But they are in tangentially related genres. And I when I was reading Uprooted, because I read it because of your recommendation, Aaron, I was wondering if Naomi was inspired by that book at all, because Dark Angel predates it by such a large chunk of time, right?
It's quite
but
possible.
Again,
yeah, I think
it was so influential.
Yeah, I think especially when you consider that Meredith was publishing in that certain specific time of YA where it became like sort of the sanctuary for a lot of women fantasy writers that were unable to publish their work in the conventional setting because they were focusing more on these kind of female-centered and romantic takes on stuff. And that, I think, was very formative. You have writers like Robin McKinley, Jane Yolen, all these wonderful writers that were kind of shoehorned into the YA genre as a whole during the 80s and 90s because of what they were writing about. And I absolutely assume that she was influenced in some way.
Yeah, because like by modern terms, Dark Angel is not exactly a YA novel. Like things can get dark in YA for sure. And you've got the young adults. Because Aaron, you talked to, I think either we talked about it in person or we talked about it in a previous episode. But like, I mean, YA is exploring darker themes again.
That's why
but,
New Way, yeah, right?
Yeah, that's like there's been the whole emergence of the new adult genre because I think authors and readers and I guess finally publishers are realizing that like people want these darker themes and they want more explicit content younger. I mean, I remember I was 14 years old looking for stories that talked about death and sex basically in the library.
Go to fan fiction. Like they get
right,
it
or
in
fan fiction.
Well, it was I grew up in that time period where when I was that age there was not the internet yet. So I grew up living in the library, like combing the stacks every single day for something that spoke to me. And it
for
was
sure,
so
like I
hard to
remember
find.
going to the library all the time on my lunch break, like pre-Twilight, looking for vampire novels in the library at school, and there were like three of them, and I read them all.
Yeah.
And obviously Twilight sort of revolutionized that genre, but and we'll do a whole episode on that. But I think like for a long time after that, I mean, even in Twilight, for example, like it touches on dark themes. It touches on death and immortality and sex, but it doesn't actually really go there.
It just deals with it in a different way. Yeah, it kind of whitewashes it, right? I mean, it's a very Christian narrative.
Right. And now, like, those books do sell. Like, I think one of the most popular young adult series right now is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. And Nat, you and I have both read that. And it's gory as hell, and it has so much graphic sex in it, and it's one of the most popular book series on the shelves right now.
Yeah.
But it's at the forefront of that new adult genre because it's not really like okay, I guess, for like publishers don't really feel comfortable marketing it to 14-year-olds, the Scholastic Book
Probably for
Fair,
good
but
reason, yeah. But still,
but people are really hungry for it, and so there's this whole new forefront of novels that I mean I've seen people on Goodreads and the internet sort of describe it as, oh, it's like young adult but with sex, and it's like, yeah, well, it is, but there's more to it
yeah,
than that.
and getting back to the original point, like the women that are writing this are writing it for women, and women have always appreciated it, and they have since they were very young. And we become sexually mature long before men do, and we're looking for this information in our literature, and we don't find it. It's completely scrubbed out. And so when we
Yep.
get something that even if it's not necessarily quote unquote literary, but it deals with the themes that we're interested in, we're gonna fucking read it. And we're going to enjoy it. And you can go fuck yourself if you think that YA is a lesser than genre or that new adult's a lesser than genre. Because honestly, that's like how we are able to experience stories nowadays. It's like, honestly, it's our gateway drug, right?
Well, I mean, as we've discussed on previous episodes, it's one of the only spaces besides actual fan fiction on the internet, archiveofourown.com,
Woohoo.
that actually caters to women and indulges women in the feminine gaze.
Well, my issue with YA is not actually why the stories that fit into that genre itself. It's like I grew up in the era where women were being forced into that genre, right?
Yeah.
And I have major beef with that. So it's like, for me, it's like if a woman wants to write YA and like within that genre, that is fantastic if it is her choice. But all too often we are put into that genre
just because we're women writing.
Yeah,
and
writing
also,
about for other women too.
If you make a focus on interpersonal relationships, right? I mean, that is part of the reason why we get shoehorned into that. They think that like socially functioning, you should be done with all of these interpersonal dynamics and this, love and love not stuff by the time you're out of high school, and you're like, no, the human condition is experiencing relationships with people.
That's one of my greatest fears actually as a writer, because some of my readers might already know this, but I'm working on like a novel and stuff. Like one of my greatest fears, and this is partially the wine speaking, so excuse me if I'm blunt, is so I'm not writing YA, but what if I'm shoved into YA? What if I'm put there? And my story is not that at all. Like it really shouldn't be there, right? And I think the reason why YA is getting more, or they're dealing with sex, or they're dealing with topics that women want to talk about more now, I think part of the reason why is because they saw the market for fan fiction. Because, at first they tried to say to women, okay, this is the genre that you are supposed to read.
Yeah.
This is the genre you're supposed to write. But we're going to tone it down a bit, because even in this genre that has been made, that is supposed to be for you, it's still too explicit, still too much for the female gaze. So they toned it down again. We still need to purify it. They toned it down again. And the thing with fan fiction, and fan fiction is done out of love, but it's also done out of frustration with the canon. Like, that's really important to note, right?
No, I mean, the reason anybody writes fan fiction is because they're not getting as much as they want out of the canon. And I mean, well, I guess that's generalizing, but still, I mean, it's like,
it's true.
No, it's true.
It's true.
Be it that you aren't satisfied with the canon, or you just want to extend beyond the canon because a one and done movie isn't enough for you. Like that's real. But also, like, there's so many AU fan fictions, alternate universe fan fiction where you just basically take those characters and take that same story, but then just push the adult themes and push the sex and push the death and push the more mature emotions, because you're not getting it from the canon.
So women were trying to, so basically women were still not getting this stuff that was explicitly written for them within the genre that they had already been, cloistered into, right? So they went to fan fiction. Like, fan fiction is fucking huge. Like if you ever look at the stats for fucking AO3 or fanfiction.net in terms of like their Alexa rankings, like in terms of like how their website ranks worldwide, insane. It is like 700 or 600 out of like 26 million sites. That is massive. That's fucking huge. It's 99% women, basically.
It's open source media revolution made by women, primarily.
So women. So I think the reason why we're getting more sex within the new adult genre and stuff like that is because publishers realized, oh shit, look at all this audience we're missing out on. Look at all these people that we are still not servicing. I bet we could buy. Like, the fact that they haven't clued into that yet, that women are explicitly hungry for narratives for them, is fucking breathtaking.
Well,
So I'm getting
no, they still exist in the
Fucking
world where, you
breathtaking.
know, Fox and Friends is going to laugh at the fact that 50 Shades of Grey is big thing, you know, which is totally understandable because it's a fucking stupid fucking book. But, like, at the same token...
Because it was literally a fan fiction. It was literally a fucking Twilight fan fiction before it was published.
Well, the worst part about it was that she didn't actually publish it or get a professional editor. She just Control F replaced Bella and Edward over and all the other Twilight named characters. So I think this is really an important conversation for us to have up front and to kind of lead into our episode of fan fiction, which we will have later. We will talk a lot more about
we will have
fanfiction.
soon.
Yes.
I am really excited about that. This actually ties into what I was going to bring up next, if I can get into it too, actually, because you talked about, like, you know, unfulfilled narratives for women or unfulfilled, you know, how we're hungry for shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, referencing what you were talking about in the very beginning, Nat, about domestic fantasy, and I think I should explain domestic fantasy and why I think Uprooted is part of this subgenre of fantasy, and how it plays into, like, our previous rant about unfulfilled women and female narratives and what we're hungry for, basically. You know, so this genre is really closely tied to the Sorcerer Husband trope, and I do think the Sorcerer Husband is a proto version of domestic fantasy to a certain extent, because they're so closely linked in so many different ways. So the stories in this genre typically feature young women who are whisked away by the magical man or creature to his castle or tower, where they either engage in a sham marriage or varying levels of domestic servitude. And the man, while initially very cold, slowly warms up to the woman and falls in love with her, usually through her internal characteristics or through her mothering of him, there's a whole Oedipus complex in there as well, right? But the softening of this man is explicitly linked to the woman taking care of him through both that internal connection, you know, being understanding or having that internal beauty, or her domestic prowess. And he rewards her with magical gifts and affections in return. And Uprooted definitely falls into this genre.
He'll usually teach her, right? He usually...
Yeah, exactly.
And I think a lot of it, is become, you know, I think when you talk about the female antagonist being the mother figure for the man, it makes sense that he's replacing her with a younger, less dominant force, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's like, so Uprooted is definitely in this genre. We'll be talking about it after this, but Howl's Moving Castle is absolutely in this genre. And it's a really popular genre, especially with women in their 20s and 30s. And funny enough, because it's so keyed into the female gaze and what we were talking about, there's less fan fiction about it because you get your rocks off in the actual canon itself. Shocker, right?
Yep.
But it's popular.
Although the Uprooted fan fiction is great. There are like 27 fics online, and I've read them all, and they're good. So
yeah, but there's only 27 compared to the I think it's 800,000 Naruto fanfics. so that should tell you. So when it's like that, usually, so there's less fan fiction because these women are explicitly writing for other women and speaking to the female experience, and they're not moderating it at all, right? And I think this is my personal take on it, but I mean, being a woman who just turned 30 and stuff like that too, and who loved this genre all throughout her 20s. I mean, I think it's popular because it allows women in domestic fantasy is popular because it allows women in unfulfilled relationships to fantasize about an alternative version of their life, you know, a more exciting version where many of their everyday routines, such as cooking or cleaning or laundry, are identical, but instead of their emotional labor being brushed aside, they are doted upon by an attractive man who is, you know, who's attentive to their hard work, who's fixed by it, right? You know, it's wish fulfillment of a very common scenario that doesn't happen too often in real life, because I think we've all been there to varying degrees with our significant others to a certain extent. I don't want to get too personal here, but like, you know, where you, as a woman, you are expected to, in general, you're expected to be emotionally available and adept at taking care of the men in your life, whether it's a significant other or a father or brother or an uncle or a grandfather. But when you ask people to be emotionally available in return, acknowledgement of this sacrifice is hard to come by, and it's often not seen as work. Yeah. So that is why it's the genre is so popular, because it ties exactly into that.
I think you just made a case for the coffee shop AU, Shy. I'm sorry.
I actually have no problem. Okay, some backstory. I have on my blog, I've gotten in trouble for taking issue with the coffee shop AU. It's not actually the coffee shop that drives me nuts. Like it is more the fact that there's so much more you can do with that, and it's not explored.
Yeah.
It becomes like the girl in Middle Earth trope, or the 10th Walker trope for the Lord of the Rings fan fiction, where every single story is written the same. When you could push it so much farther.
Yeah.
So it's not actually the fact that it's a coffee shop. It's not the fact that it's an AU. It's not the fact that it's small scale. It's just I want to see more variation. But that is a personal preference. Whatever floats your boat, et cetera, et cetera.
I think you make a great point about the fact that emotional labor is oftentimes really not looked upon as being a legitimate source of like a physical contribution to a relationship. And it is just as important and just as weighty as doing all of these household chores. So you could have somebody in your life who is a significant other who does all of these things, kind of carries their own weight. But if they're not taking up the emotional labor, it can be very difficult. It can be quite difficult.
As I said, we've all been there to varying degrees,
Yeah.
And that's why this kind of story, like this genre of domestic fantasy, and you see it, like we're talking about like published works of domestic fantasy, but you see it so often fan fiction. Like it is a huge percentage of fan fiction. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why you have fanfics where they take a story that is quite large. Let's say, for example, we'll take Star Wars fandom because we're all
Harry Potter.
Right?
Harry Potter.
Yeah,
Harry Potter. Harry Potter is great. So Harry Potter is a great example of this, where you take a large story and then you shrink it down to talk about the domestic stuff, right? In fan fiction. And part of this, I should clarify, part of this has to do with the fact that writing a story from scratch, like large scale conflict like that, like speaking as someone who does that already, like writes
establishing
those
characters and conflict and narrative is very difficult.
It's a huge job. So that's part of the reason why they shrink it down to something more manageable. But the other reason why is because these stories explicitly are linked to women and their everyday lives, and they want something that speaks to their experience,
Yeah.
And they really do want something that speaks to their experience. So they take genres, they go to fandoms that are quite large, like Harry Potter, and they write about that stuff. They shrink it down because while I think Harry Potter has a great idea behind it, there was a lot unfulfilled in the canon itself. At least for me personally, that I was left unsatisfied. And I think
Harry Potter has one of the biggest fan fiction fandom bases of anything.
It's self-perpetuating. It's self-perpetuating right now. It does not need the canon to function. But I think the Harry Potter books suffered because they were toned back for the male gaze in a lot of ways. And we'll do a Harry Potter. I won't get too much into it because Harry Potter needs to be its own episode.
It will.
But but so you have a lot of people that are unfulfilled with that canon, so they write fan fiction about that. Whereas canon books that explicitly deal with domestic fantasy, deal with these themes and address them fully, like Howl's Moving Castle or Uprooted, there's very few fan fiction in comparison. And that's because the canon spoke to the female experience. Women predominantly write fan fiction, so they don't need to write it. They're happy, it's like shocker. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we sometimes write about the mundane because, again, like you said, like it elevates it. Like we want to see our lives written in real, but elevated. And what's wonderful about this trope and these themes is that it becomes a gateway to being able to experience the magical, right? Like, so by doing this hard work and this labor, you're able to actually become closer to something that's more interesting and arcane. And
it's like it's satisfying so much because like so many women in Western society, at least, and I'm sure plenty of societies across the globe, we just get shoehorned into these shitty domestic lives where we're just supposed to like take care of a husband and raise the children and whatever. And it's really, it's promising to think that something like that feels really worthwhile and really like magical literally can come from that. And like and that's shitty to say because it's like obviously people love their husbands and they love their children and they love their lives, but at the same time, coming from like my point of view, my parents, I saw multiple failed marriages growing up and like like they're the fucking divorce rate is like over 50%. Like a lot of times these things just don't work out and people just aren't happy. And so it's a nice sentiment that something magical and really fulfilling and self-developing can come out of like domestication like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
something can work out, and honestly, like if we're going to be going into Howl's Moving Castle later, but the whole point of that trilogy even is that you have this wonderful relationship that develops into something that's more domestic, and it's a marriage, and it's built on equal trust and respect, and you really often usually just get a happily ever after, and the story ends, and all that tension and conflict is like built into it, but what happens afterwards?
It ends when the sexual tension is resolved. But here
Exactly.
it's like the sexual tension starts at the beginning, and yeah, it does get resolved, but at the same time, like it just
It's
shows
the emotional tension.
that
It's the
there is a
Yeah.
story to be had after you reconcile those feelings. And happily ever after doesn't just come when you admit, hey, I'm in love with you.
Yeah.
There's a life to be had after that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Domesticity is undervalued in general, I think. And it's so much of a part of our lives. You have to eat, you have to fucking clean, you have to do everything. But when you're in a relationship...
Well, that's part of what I really liked about Uprooted. I mean, to get it back onto that book.
He
right
taught
there,
her he taught her cleaning spells. And
He taught her
spells to
cleaning
make
spells,
her
but
clothes look okay.
But she sucks at it, and
Yeah.
she rejects it. All right, so like to tie it back into Uprooted, because we've gone on to this like really big tangent that I think is great, but we're also getting really off topic a little bit. Like just to tie it into why we liked Uprooted, beyond the fact that it's part of this genre that really speaks to the feminine gaze and the female experience, is I like the subtext of Uprooted a lot, actually. And subtext can be viewed differently by different people. I mean, that's part of the beauty of subtext, I think. I think Uprooted plays into this idea that we are always tied to the places that we originate from, whether we want to be or not. But in the case of Uprooted, I think Naomi Novik, she really tried to make a point that being tied to your origins can actually be a good thing, rather than a source of shame. Like it can be a source of power and strength, as we see with I can't pronounce the name.
Agnieszka.
Agnieszka. This is going to become a running trope with me where I can't pronounce names worth shit. Look, so Agnieszka, after learning the truth of the woods and the fate of the villagers in the valley, she acknowledges that there's corruption afoot in the valley itself, but instead of rejecting her connection to it as Sarkhan does, she embraces the woods and repurposes this darkness to suit her needs. And I think that's actually really uplifting. And I think in our Koshai's Beloved episode, we talked about how The Bear and the Nightingale didn't have great action, but this story did. I think it's got great action, and the way that it's described, it flows along really nicely. I wouldn't say there's as much suspense, but I don't think it's a suspenseful book. I think it's
really
more
not.
about it's more about directly moving the action, because Agnieszka is a very self-possessed character who drives the plot instead of the plot driving her. And there's not actually that too many mysteries in the story itself, right? It's more just like, how do we solve this problem? And I really liked the beginning of the story. Like, it was so good. I mean, normally I don't like first-person narrative. I think it's because, while first-person narrative is really great, it's also really easy to fuck up. But in this book, it was just fantastic. Like, I was hooked immediately, and there's this like great combination of world building, characterization, and rising action. And there's actually a little bit of subtle horror in it. I won't reveal exactly which part, because
she's talking about the wood. The wood is a very formidable opponent in the book. And it's not spoilers to say that. Like, it's a very evil place, but in a good way.
In general, it's the wood.
There's gore.
There's I mean, I'm a terrible judge for this, because I like really gory stuff.
There's a good bit of gore for the young adult, new adult genre.
Yeah, I'd say so. But there is some subtle horror in there, and it's actually done really well. And I think actually my all-time favorite story about it, or all-time favorite thing about it, is that the wood itself. I would argue that the deuteragonist in this story is the wood instead of Sarkhan.
I agree.
And I think it's so fast, at least for me, because of what I've read. I find it so fascinating, the idea of the force being evil. Like, it's actually evil in the story. And to put this into context, in fantasy and subgenres of fantasy, nature is usually coded as good, whereas humanity and human innovation is coded as bad. But Uprooted is coded in reverse. And while the story does explain that the woods grew evil through basically, a certain set of circumstances, there's this weird subtext at the end where it continues to remain evil, and that evil's just kind of sleeping. I don't
think it's necessarily evil either. I think it's just naturally dark, and it
the darkness of nature.
It consumes.
Yeah, and
it's death.
And to be honest with you, but maybe corruption is the better word. I don't know exactly. But my point is, I find this coding fascinating, and I don't actually know how to feel about it because it's so alien to what I've read before. Like, I guess I really like the fact that it's an alien sort of coding. Like, she's subverted that.
It's a little bit Cthulhu.
Yeah, yeah. I actually really enjoy that.
It is a little bit Cthulhu. So I really liked Uprooted, obviously. I'm the one who recommended it initially to both Cheyenne and Nat. My favorite aspect of Uprooted was the theme that, and what I personally relate to the most is that if you're ever really going to sort of be human, you have to care. And that's something that, like I said, I relate to deeply on a personal level. You know, a lot of times it's easy to be like Sarkin and to just sort of shut off your emotion and shut off caring and cut yourself off from humanity and human interaction and putting down roots and giving a shit. But you also cut yourself off from any real emotional satisfaction or peace when you do that. And Sarkin is a really troubled, sort of on edge, anxious person. And a lot of that, I think, is because he just doesn't really have a home, doesn't really have anything that he has faith in other than his own routines. And that's scary, you know, like to invest in something emotionally and to actively take a step to decide I'm going to be real and raw with this person or with this place and really invest myself in it and put down roots. But you have to take that risk emotionally.
You have a really good point in the sense of the roots, right? Like, so he has lived as kind of an alien within this culture at the edge of this forest, but on this very rural community where he's taking these girls from their homes and teaching them the ways of magic and the ways of the court that he's familiar with because he's older, and he's been doing this routine over and over again, but he's never really actually tried to understand or acclimate to the place that he lives in. He is very distant from it. And what the beauty of the relationship is that he learns from her how to appreciate that, because he's taking these girls because they have a magical heritage, right?
And their magical heritage is literally that they are bound to the valley because they've drank from the water, essentially. And he refuses to because he's afraid. He's afraid of making that commitment, and he's afraid of emotionally investing in Agnieszka and of emotionally investing in the valley. Like throughout the novel, like nobody has ever really known or seen the dragon, despite the fact that he's been living in the valley for a century. Nobody even knows who he is because he's so afraid of making those emotional attachments and becoming emotionally acquainted with the people of the valley and becoming emotionally invested in the valley. It's easier to just have someone else do it for him because he's afraid of making that commitment.
Exactly. Yeah. So it speaks to the fact that, like, bridging the gap between heaven and earth is kind of one of those common themes of these stories, where you have something that's magical that lives in a different realm, and you have something that lives in our earthbound, real realm that has to deal with the common people. And that's one of the beauties of Agnieszka.
Agnieszka.
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of Agnieszka, is that she actually is able to bridge that gap, and she's able to protect the people of her world because of what she learns from Sarkin. But, like, Sarkin would never have been able to do that without her.
Yeah, and because, like, I think one of Agnieszka's most defining characteristics is that she gives a shit. And, you know, she loves her best friend Kasia, and she loves her family, and she loves Sarkin, and she just cares so much, and she doesn't care that she cares. You know, she's willing to put 100% on the table for the people that she cares about. And, like, Sarkin is like, what the fuck, basically, because he just doesn't get that. It's such a foreign concept to him, you know, like investing in people emotionally.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, you even get it, like, there's a brief point in the book where, like, Sarkin talks about one of his previous love interests, and he's essentially just like, ha ha ha, how could she ever give a shit about me, basically. And he talks about himself as though he's a fool for having fallen in love. And, you know, Agnieszka sort of proves him wrong, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think he's always associated these women with the fact that he would teach them and they would run away, which makes sense because they've lived in this place as long as they have. And a lot of the easy compulsion is to, when you live in a rural area, is to be like, I'm done with this place. I'm gone. There's nothing here for me. And if he wasn't providing an emotional availability to them that obviously didn't happen, then of course they're going to leave. So when you have this true romance that happens, it's based in both, I can stay here for a long time and I can build a life here for once because I've never done it before, but I can also do it in a way that grows that other person. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so aside from that, I thought the prose was really pretty, and I really liked the world building. I thought the pacing was well done, so I thought it was an enjoyable read. It wasn't too dense, or I didn't have any qualms with the way it was written itself. And I really liked like the nature horror aspect of it. It was super interesting to me because, like, I think it was Cheyenne earlier said that normally you see humanity coded as good, and no, you see humanity coded as evil and nature coded as good. And in this sense, nature wasn't necessarily coded as evil, though it was the antagonist, but, you know, it did have this underlying narrative of man versus the wild, and this idea that we are constantly keeping nature at bay, and the risk of being, like, sort of reclaimed by nature depends on
Well, if you're looking
humanity's...
at if you're looking at like an alignment board, maybe I'm being misunderstood. If you're looking at like the alignment board, you know, like with true, neutral, etc., I consider the woods, you know, neutral evil.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not going to go out of its way to
Well,
fuck you.
and part of the evil is, again, it's a response to humanity encroaching upon it, right? Like, so
Exactly.
yeah, we don't usually experience that in our day to day because the environment can't fight back usually. But if the environment
Yeah,
can fight back, it would, right?
Because I don't think nature, I don't think the wood in this story was ever really singling out individual people, or, you know, aside from, I guess, like when people encroached on it specifically, like when Agnieszka attacked the wood, like the wood thought, oh, I'm going to attack you back. But it was never about, oh, I have a mortal enemy. Like, it was more just like, we're going to keep spreading and trying to grow and encroaching because you guys are encroaching on us. And throughout the novel, like, man keeps burning back the wood and trying to reclaim ground on nature and carve out its own separate existence away from nature. And the story isn't rectified until, in the end, Agnieszka sort of accepts nature and realizes that, like, man and nature have to live symbiotically. Like, you can't deny that we live in coexistence with nature.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. It's an important part of the story, really, is that finding the confluence and being able to have a truce of sorts, right? Like, we don't go any further into you, you don't come into us anymore, because that was the whole existential threat of the whole book, was the woods were going to creep over all of Polnia and Russia. And yeah, sorry, I'm just rambling.
No, man.
It.
Do you have like favorite parts that we haven't mentioned yet, or?
Oh, mine? Yeah, I
Yeah,
should go back to the
yours.
Polnia and Russia thing, because of the fact that it's more interesting to me that they have this whole, it's a Slavic and Baltic divide, right? And the folklore and the mythology of those areas are very similar, and they're very Germanic too, because you have all of the Germanic
Baba Yaga
nations.
makes an appearance.
Yeah, she does. And that's the whole perfect part of it, is that it speaks to the stories that were from that region, and, you know, the whole Black Forest trope of Germanic folklore is still very well seated in the Baltic and Slavic mythology. I think we've discussed this earlier in Koschei. It's always been there because of the fact that the woods were scary. Like, you don't live in the woods. Those are where the bears and the wolves and all the dark things live. You live in the fields, and you cut the woods back, and you make your space in it. And you deal with the consequences of that, which is really interesting to me, because I feel like this world is a magical kind of being in itself. And in one book, to establish a world that has that much richness and depth is very, very impressive on Naomi's part. She did a great job with it. So
yeah, and I think something else that was super interesting was how, you know, when the villainous traits of the wood did manifest, like when the Wood Queen was manifesting in Kazuya, and you know, whenever Agnieszka was inside the wood seems to see the truth and say
nothing is hidden from it.
Felt like the Exorcist, like these people were possessed by some demon or whatever that was just calling them on their bullshit, essentially. And it's just interesting that, you know, it's nature having this perspective and telling you how shit really is, because, you know, I think humanity spends a lot of time denying nature and denying the hard truths of life, and this podcast always gets really existential, but
no, it's absolutely true. And to see nature as a hive mind, right? Like, nature as a encroaching force. I mean, fuck, even the newest season of Stranger Things dealt with it. Like the idea that you cannot be separated from something. If it is biological in nature, it is connected. And we don't have that sense of that anymore because we lived very, very disconnected from nature. I mean, come on.
So far from
People
it.
get weekly fucking boxes of food from the internet. Like, there is no connection to nature anymore. You don't have to exist outside of your, single unit home and your lifestyle. So, I mean, you can build a garden, but, and speaking from experience, building a garden in the city is a difficult beast. And it's just, we're just so far removed from it. But if you live and grow up in that environment where it is always around you and is a constant presence, it does change your ideas of how life works, right? And we talk a lot about how, especially in the we talk a lot about on the Koshai episode that you become familiar with the seasons, you become familiar with the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And that's just part of it. And I really appreciated that part of the story. And to go on my own separate tangent here, because I have to say that Kazuya was my favorite ever best friend, prettier girl trope ever.
She was interesting and she contributed to the plot.
Yeah. That is like my favorite part of the book, is that you would think that this beautiful, lovely girl would just go off, get married to the town hottie, or whatever, and then have a bunch of children and do all these things. But no, she actually becomes a plot point and a very huge, she almost becomes a bodyguard in a sense. Like she's, I hate spoiling the book, but like, it's so amazing what she becomes and how her relationship with Agnieszka like actually develops, and how, she has a little bit of resentment about not being taken, but she doesn't like express that as much because she's kind of happy that she doesn't have to leave her family. At the same token, she ends up leaving her family and she has to go off on her own journey. And it's really great to see a female side character have her own narrative arc and her own story and her own interesting interactions. It's really lovely. And that was
good.
It's a good example. It's one of the few examples that I've come across of a healthy female friendship. Like, it's becoming more common now, but for a long time, you couldn't actually find really good examples of healthy female friendships within fiction written for women, and this has partially to do with internalized misogyny and stuff like that. But women were always written with like this intention of being pitted against one another. And in order to get male attention, basically, that's what it was. And it's not, and it's not that you can't have female antagonists, but the fact that they were always, but there is something becomes really deeply troubling for me personally when you can't find examples of good female friendship, where people are different but interacting with one another.
I agree completely. It's been completely underrated in narratives for a long time. Women were always seen as being rivals in any sense. And you can see that even in the Dark Angel, where she's kind of a rival for her, master but friend. And again, Dark Angel subverts that by having them become friends in the end. But at the same token, you do see that a lot in any kind of fiction, is like women are always playing antagonists to each other. Or if the best friend is there, she's just a support unit and she's completely separate from the narrative. Like, you can write a good friendship, but they never write it with the kind of conflict that makes sense almost on a, not like a romantic scale, but on a platonic scale, where you actually have conflict and you have to resolve that conflict with your friend. And it doesn't have to be based in whether you're fighting over a man or you're fighting over the narrative itself, right?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good strength of the domestic genre, actually. Like, we'll talk about Howl's Moving Castle very shortly, but you also see this friendship in Howl's Moving Castle. I think so.
Yeah, you do with the sisters, for sure.
Yeah, and it's so it can be familial, or it can be like, just regular friends who are almost like sisters too. And so I think that's actually a really good strength of Uprooted and of the domestic fantasy genre and of the Sorcerer Husband trope, at least the way that it's been being currently subverted. That said, I did have a few critiques about.
Well, first, let me just say, we have to touch on Sarkin real quick as a love interest before we segue into our critiques.
Let's go into Sarkin.
Well, my critique is of Sarkin.
Me too.
Okay, I know, but that's why I'm saying let me say what I like about Sarkin before you tear him apart.
No, I love Sarkin. He's so hot. Oh my god.
I love. Okay, like, I think my favorite thing about Sarkin is that he's effeminate. Like, he's described as being sort of thin and brittle boned. He likes cleaning and having nice things and dressing well. He likes fashion. So he doesn't necessarily, and he likes studying. He's a bookworm.
He's like
he doesn't have a
Howl.
ton of he doesn't have a
Touchy-feely
ton of
Howl.
traditionally masculine interests, and so I really liked that about him. And I don't know, I liked his prickliness. He sort of just reminded me of, like, I mean, he's just a grumpy old man. He's like 120 years old or whatever.
Yeah,
really
I'm
liked
reminded
him.
of dating somebody my grandfather's age, and I think it was very appropriate.
Yeah, he's just outdated and perpetually horrified by Agnieszka because she's, coming into his world and like fucking up his traditions and his status quo. And I liked
You
it
damn
a lot.
millennial you.
I love it, yeah, because she totally breaks down his expectations. Because all of his previous servants were terrified of him, and she is terrified of him, but she's also kind of like angry at him all the time, which is perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, but I would say for Sarkin, I also really enjoyed how he was so prickly and fastidious and like obsessed with beauty. And he has like a lot of quirks that I found actually really charming. Like in terms of his interpersonal interactions with people, I think that was really well done. That said, he was an okay love interest, or he was an okay, like he kind of just, I mean, I say this with love because I really do like the book, but he's kind of this background element to the story. Like he really, really, really fades in comparison to the actual wood itself.
Yeah, he's kind of like wallpaper.
I wish he was more prevalent.
He is wallpaper. No, you're totally correct. He's very charming wallpaper, but he's still wallpaper. And like his appearance is never really described in depth ever. To this day, all I can picture about him is him having dark hair, thin lips, and this perpetual pout, right?
Yeah. He's pale and has frown lines and dark eyes and black hair.
Even better.
That's not enough. That's not enough. I need to, as an illustrator and someone who's super visual, I need more than that. And I think Howl's Moving Castle did a much better job of describing everyone and how they looked, right? Because it's not just Sarkhan who was not really physically described.
Yeah, nobody was physically described.
But, well, I think Kazia was actually pretty well described. Blue eyes, long curly blonde brown hair. She describes the people that she finds physically beautiful, but maybe she's not focused on that with Sarkhan. So again, first-person narrative does change that.
That's an interesting point, because if you look at it, if she describes the people that are physically beautiful, and this actually ties into my other critique, which I'll get to in a second, the people she describes as like in great depth are all blonde and blue-eyed. So the queen, her son, Tasia, so I mean that itself raises some interesting questions.
She describes Sarkhan as handsome.
Yeah,
that's not enough, Erin. Though that's not enough.
No, but I'm just saying that she argues that, like, I mean, I think from an author perspective, I think she thinks Sarkhan's handsome.
Well, there's a difference between saying he's handsome and like that's telling, and then showing how he's handsome. Like this is something that you guys crit me for all the time in my stories.
Well, yeah, again, a first-person narrative or even a third-person impression, you have to speak to what that character is experiencing at that time. And I think it makes sense that when you're in this kind of Beauty and the Beast narrative, you're kind of focusing on the awfulness, not necessarily the physical beauty. I mean, you can mention it, but you don't necessarily fixate and focus on it, which is great because it's sort of like an undercurrent. Like she says he's handsome, we establish he's handsome, and then, maybe 2 chapters later, she kind of acknowledges that she has a sexual attraction to him. So,
But it comes out of nowhere. There's no foreplay. There's no...
I don't know. I think doing magic together is foreplay.
I think there is foreplay.
There's definitely foreplay.
Oh, I wanted more.
Me too. Okay. We all wanted more. That's why we are going to write fan fiction eventually, but we just haven't gotten into it yet.
Okay, so it's not even like, okay, so when I say I wanted more, I guess what I'm not even looking for is more sex. I'm looking for erotic literature, which is very different from smut, and this is a personal preference of mine. But so the difference between smut and erotic literature or sensual text is, so smut shows you everything. It's the actual act of sex or foreplay itself. It's very physical. And erotic literature isn't even about sex half the time. It's literally about the sensuality of the text and teasing what is possible but not fully realized, through subtext. So I guess we got a little bit of that when they're describing mixing their magic, but it could have been pushed way farther. I was just so... I was blue-balled.
But Uprooted is it pushes the boundary for the genre it's in.
I guess so, yeah.
Absolutely. Sorry, I just took a drink.
What?
I'm gonna repeat that.
Like, I wish that it
Abso-fucking-lutely.
had graphic sex, but it's about as graphic as it gets within the confines of that genre, because
Yeah.
it's not an adult novel.
I guess that's the point, because I actually don't read nearly as much YA as you. Like, I tend to gravitate towards stuff that's a lot darker. I guess.
See, I would like to read more from the adult shelves, but all of the dudes there have long hair, so I just can't.
What? So, I'm going to just interject here a little bit with what I did not like about the other side characters, because Kazuya was great, but I felt like, and again, it also kind of comes back to Sarkin, like, he's very undefined as a character. He doesn't get a lot of motive action, but the side characters that he introduces...
I'm a Falcon stan, so tread lightly.
No, I'm a Falcon stan too. He's not really a villain, but he's definitely kind of, like, tiptoeing the line, which is great.
Yeah.
But at the same token, everybody else when you go to court, even the queen that they rescue and the prince, all those people, and especially the other wizards as part of that council, are very underutilized. And
oh yeah, they're just background
they're just,
noise.
again, background noise, wallpaper for that setting. They don't seem like they have very much of a narrative intention behind them, so they're just there to interact with. And there's a Deus Machina that comes in at some point. There's actually several Deus Machinas that come in and throughout the text, but one of them is definitely when they're in the court, and it just feels a little bit forced to me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a way to get the story back to where it should be, and it should have been actually. I think it would have served the story better if it would have stayed in one setting. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think that Agnieszka should have ever gone to court. I think because that's one of the critiques that I've seen most commonly on Goodreads is people are like, why did she leave? Everybody really liked when she was in the tower with the dragon. Why did they have to upend the setting?
Yeah.
I don't think it really served. I think there could have been better way. I understand why it happened, because they needed a plot point to happen, but there could have been better ways to do it.
Yeah, because that was the most boring part of the book and the hardest for me to get through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's...
And it didn't actually have a narrative function for me. Like, honestly, it was to get the queen back, but like it wasn't. Again, you could have done everything that happened in that place within the context of that setting, and it would have been much richer and much more interesting. Because when you're separated and distant so much from that original setting, you feel like there has to be some sort of thing that you get out of that transition. And you don't really get any transition out of it. And also, Sarkin isn't there, right? Like, he stays in the tower. And
they have phone sex at one point, but that's about it.
That's true. I forgot about
phone
that.
Sex.
God, fantasy phone sex.
Oh my god.
I take back everything I said. This is fucking awesome.
And by phone sex, I mean she like summons his arousal through the fire or something. I don't know.
Whispers force bond in your ear.
Yeah, they have correspondence through magic across a long distance.
Yeah, and to add on to your point about the side character being underutilized. There was one side character, I don't know, the subtext about it really made me a little bit uncomfortable. So again, the characters are not really described physically that well, but there is one character who's visibly black. Alosha, I think that's her name.
Yeah, is she the leader of the circle? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, she's a leader. Anyways, she reveals 2/3 of the way through the book that she was a slave from Namib, which is just so, it's out of place. Like, why does... Okay, so first of all, Namib is a real desert in Namibia, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, why does the only... I think she's literally the only physically described black character in this book. Why does she need to be an ex-slave? Like, it doesn't serve any purpose in the story. And she is put into this kind of trope where she's in charge of taking care of the royal children, despite being the most powerful. Yeah, so it was like, maybe I'm being hypersensitive, but like the subtext is super weird and out of place and kind of inappropriate, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, it's that kind of...
it serves no purpose.
It serves that kind of bodyguard, slave, eunuch trope that is very common in medieval and any kind of fantasy that tries to delve into that. Like, they feel like they have to shoehorn black characters into roles of being subordinate to the kind of the royalty or the people of the land that they're existing within, and it just feels wrong. Like, it doesn't feel right at all. Like, it feels like this character deserves better because she's a fucking powerful wizard, and she's also like a warrior at the same token. So why would she be forced into this? Why wouldn't she be the general of the army as opposed to the king's son? Because she's obviously...
Yeah, like there's no point to that at all, and I was just so, I don't know, I really didn't like it.
Well, it
So,
doesn't
why?
serve well for representation within stories because again, it fits that same dynamic that they've been excoriating for time immemorial. So why would I be interested in that character? Because she feels like a trope, you know? And it's sad to say that because like she's a really cool character and she has a lot of potential, but again, it's unexplored because don't move your character 2/3 of the way into the story into a new narrative and then immediately pluck her out of it. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was trying too much too soon, and she should have written a trilogy out of these books, but I'm so glad that she wrote what she did within the one book that she wrote of it, so no complaints.
Yeah.
Besides that,
Right.
I'm complaining. Hear me complain. Alyosha's an
We can
underutilized character.
We can play with love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we moving on to Howl's Moving Castle now?
Yeah.
Yes, I think we should, yeah.
So moving on from our previous discussion, although we've mentioned this previously, we are going to be discussing Howl's Moving Castle. It's a fantasy novel by British author Diana Wynne Jones, first published in 1986. It's actually part of a trilogy of books. Their other books in the series are Castle in the Air, published in 1990, and House of Many Ways, published in 2008. And while they're wonderful books, they don't actually adhere to the discussion that we're trying to have right now, so we're going to kind of save that for later. So you're probably already familiar with the film by Studio Ghibli, released in 2004. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature that year. It's a wonderful, wonderful film, but the novelization has a lot of promise and wonderful things to explore, so we are going to start with that. Shai, can you explain a little bit more about the novelization?
So it's been a really long time since I read this book, and I forgot how much I loved it. Like it's really, really a gift. While it's part of the domestic fantasy genre, or that whole Sorcerer's Husband trope, I think I prefer to Uprooted, and it's also very different from Uprooted too, right? Like it's not. They talk about the same things, same things, but it's not the same sort of story. And the story itself centers around, as Nat mentioned, Sophie Hatter, who is the eldest of 3 daughters living in a quasi-Victoriana world where she is cursed by the Witch of the Wastes to turn into an old woman until someone can see her true value. And once she's turned into an old woman, Sophie runs away after being cursed, and while in the form of an old woman, she meets and moves in with the wizard Howl, who eventually sees her enchantment and falls in love with her. And it's really, as Nat mentioned again, it's this really, really well written, really smart, really fun book, and the prose itself is amazing. And while we're only talking about the first book because it deals with the themes that are prevalent to the Sorcerer's Husband, I'd also like to point out that the first book also comes to a definitive conclusion, so it can be read in isolation as well. Like, you don't need the other books to function with it.
Absolutely.
We just pretend they're not canon.
Well, I think one of my critiques of these books is that they definitely deviate from the whole Sorcerer's Husband's trope into the married wife and couple that bicker a lot.
No.
Yeah, I know. I met some wonderful ladies buying some Howl's Moving Castle prints at Rose City Comic Con last year, and I was like, "Do you like the other books?" And they were like, "No, they fight too much." And I'm like, "Okay, all right, moving on."
Well, that's one of my pet peeves, I think, and it's such a cop out for so many authors that once a couple comes to terms with the fact that they're a couple, which a lot of times doesn't necessarily happen in the first book of a trilogy, but once they do come together, the author's like, oh shit, how do I write conflict? I guess I'll just make them bicker and like create unnecessary drama that doesn't actually add anything to the plot. Is it sort of like that? Because I haven't read them.
Yeah. Castle in the Air I've read, but I haven't read the newest one. And I can tell you that it's a lot about shape-shifting. So they move into different stories, similar to the way that C.S. Lewis does different stories in his Chronicles of Narnia series.
Gotcha.
So they are there, but they're only accessory characters. And when they show up, they're definitely fighting. And in a good way, but it's also sort of like, okay, we can get over the whole like Howl's a carpet the whole time, like it's funny, but it's also kind of like, well, our true dynamic is only explored really in the first book. So anyway,
yeah, and that true dynamic is why I like the book, right? And to tie into the reasons why I like this dynamic and why I like Howl's Moving Castle more than Uprooted, I think it's because I like Sophie Hatter more than Agnieszka. This is not because the characters in Uprooted are badly written. I mean, like, at least the main characters, I should say. We've already complained about the side characters. Agnieszka is brilliant in her own way, but I really identify with a lot of the quirks and insecurities that Sophie has, even though I think I'm a relatively different person from her. Because like Sophie, I'm the eldest child in my family. And when you're the eldest child, there are a lot of expectations placed on you. along with this simultaneous idea that you're more likely to fail because you're the first of the kids to go through A, B, and to go through certain steps in your life, right?
Yeah.
We are all eldest children here.
Yeah,
Actually,
we're all eldest children.
That's the funniest part, is that we're all eldest children, and we've all gone through the motions and been told that we're going to be the success of the family, and also we're going to fail. And I think that's a really interesting take on that, is that you have in our Kolschai episode about how the Ivan was the third son, so he was expected to fail and not be like anything to the family, but he ends up being the hero. She's the eldest.
He's a failure to me.
Ivans are always failures, yes. But to say that, like being the eldest daughter always kind of has a prerequisite upon you. And one of the things that I liked about this story, and Shai, you mentioned this in post, but the idea that her younger sisters are also kind of going off on their own journeys, and her stepmother is a really important figure in this story, is that she's basically inherited the Hattery shop from Sophie's now deceased father. And she's given Sophie the opportunity to basically run that store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and it's like it's even like the smaller things I like about Sophie too, because like Sophie, I'm a seamstress and I really like sewing. This is a hobby of mine. Not something I want to do like in a professional capacity. And I'm also organized to the point where it drives other people insane. Like I can't help but organize stuff. And Sophie also struggles with.
You guys should see our podcast Google Drive.
God, the drive for that. I tried to organize it.
Me and Nat made a mess of it.
Oh yeah,
it's nice to have a partner that has mild OCD, which is good.
The folder's titled, Nat makes no sense. Please organize. I don't know what files are which. No, it's literally titled that. But anyways, no, but I also on a deeper, more cutting note, I guess, is so throughout the story, and she gets past it, which is great. But throughout the story, Sophie struggles with her internal insecurities over how boring she is or how she looks. And she tells herself that because she isn't special, she shouldn't want for special things. But this doesn't stop her from wanting them at the same time, which is a very human response. Yeah. And I can really identify with that because, internal insecurities, I mean, I think we all deal with to a certain extent, except for, the narcissistic you. But the internal insecurities are something that we all struggle with. And I personally have struggled with that for ages. But that doesn't stop me from wanting to make an amazing podcast. It doesn't stop me from wanting to write an amazing story, all these other things.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, continue. I'm halfway drunk, so it's okay.
It's okay. Yeah. So what I was going to say is that like part of the charm of this story is that it exists in Ignory, which is basically a land where magic is real and fairy tales are real. And there's an expectation sort of there that everything is more enchanted and wonderful than it would be. But Sophie lives in this world where she's definitely considering herself as being boring, which is completely untrue because she actually has secret magic. Like the hats that she makes in her hat shop actually have a certain kind of animus to them. They're able to kind of dictate the fates of the people that wear them, which is one of those kind of nice and little subtle things that you do with a story where obviously the girl's going to have magic because the sorcerer has to teach her that. But
that's that's an interesting parallel I hadn't recognized between Howl's Moving Castle and Uprooted, because there's the whole thing with Agnieszka makes dresses and she uses her magic to make dresses, and she sort of uses a different magic or a different dress depending on her mood or like the function of whatever she's about to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It speaks to the femininity of that magic, right? Like you can be ostentatious at points, which is wonderful because every girl wants a little bit of ostentatiousness, but she's also able to tone it down and, get to work, which is part of the charm of these characters, is that they have the ability to navigate both worlds.
Yeah. And related to all this, I think that Diana Wynne Jones did a really great job with the metaphor of Sophie's magical disguise. I mean, related to the whole idea of magic, because
amazing. And I think that
it's just like it's totally fine, man.
I got excited.
I got excited too.
We could all talk about it at once. It'll become this giant cacophony. But I think it was great because Sophie feels, so at first she's upset, but then she feels freed by it because she's almost like invisible to do what she wants to do. Like she doesn't feel this pressure on her. But she experiences both the negative side of this invisibility and the positive side of it. And I think the metaphor behind that is really, really smart and intelligent, because basically once women reach a certain age and their youth is gone and their beauty is gone, they're often seen as invisible by our society.
Absolutely. I'm just gonna say that right now. Like you see that with
Worthless.
like Hollywood, especially like
Actresses over 35 are shit out of luck. Or actually, I think my favorite quote on it was Carrie Fisher. I don't know what if it was a talk show. I can't remember I think she was hosting an award ceremony of some sort, but she got up on stage and she was like, "Hey, can you guys see me? People in Hollywood don't tend to see women my age." Something along those lines.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how this metaphor of invisibility and old age plays into Sophie's insecurity, right? Because when she's turned into an old woman, and initially she's upset when it first happens. I mean, like she goes into shock, and then she's upset, and then she accepts
horrified, yeah.
Yeah, like then she just genuinely just accepts it after she gets past that horror, because she considers it her lot in life, because she is the third daughter doomed to failure, and it felt like a form of learned helplessness.
It's also, can I also interrupt and just say that we should clarify that the curse came from the Witch of the Wastes, who mistakenly believed that Howl was in love with her because she believed that Howl was in love with her sister, but she thought she was a mistaken identity point. And so, like, she's sort of like, oh God, not another day of me having to suffer for my sisters or for my life, And I think that's a kind of a beautiful little entry point into the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also think it's interesting how, like, the Witch of the Waste, she's an older woman and she's hideous. And she puts this curse on Sophie because she's sort of like, fuck you, you're still young and beautiful and he loves you and not me because, I'm old and worthless now.
Yeah.
Well, the Witch of the Waste, she has many different forms, doesn't she? Like, I kind of...
Yeah.
In the film, she's definitely ugly, but she's voiced by Lauren Bacall, and I can never see Lauren Bacall as being ugly because she is my queen. In the book, yes, she wears many disguises, and she's definitely putting on glamour. She's trying to be something that she's not, which is completely opposite of Sophie. Sophie's trying to be something that she is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like and related into other things as to what I loved about the book too, and it's a little side note, not quite connected to the overall main themes of what we're talking about in this podcast, but I loved Calcifer, right? Like
love Calcifer.
Calcifer is just so well done, both in the book and the movie. And actually, even though the anime adaptation is really, really different from the book itself in terms of the subtext and the messages it was trying to send across, I think the anime adaptation was very faithful to Calcifer's personality. I mean, they made him look cuter, but in general, it was that's just that style of those movies, right?
Yeah, and how can you go wrong with Billy Crystal? I mean, honestly, the best voice for Calcifer.
Well, I never actually listened to the dub version. I always watched the subtitles, right? I've never.
Okay.
Nope. Yeah, that's the only version I've ever seen.
That's great.
I cannot watch it without picturing Patrick Bateman.
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say, like, yeah, the voice cast of that is lit, but the sense that you're listening to Christian Bale, and I always want to hear like Batman, where are the drugs? Whenever he's like holding on to Sophie. Sorry, anyway.
I'm not wearing hockey pads. That's what I hear.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Okay. All right.
And before too, I mean, we've all talked about it a little bit too, but I think I really want to bring up the point that, like, in comparison to Uprooted, another reason why I think the two books, why Uprooted and Howl's Moving Castle, despite being part of the same genre, are different, is that Uprooted is all about the big picture conflict, like Agnieszka. Like, yeah, this is going to give a running trope with me. I can't do anything worth shit. So her troubles start off small, and by the end of the story, she's taking on an enemy which threatens the entire kingdom and the kingdom next to theirs too. And Sophie Hatter's story starts off small and remains small in that it is centered almost exclusively around interpersonal conflicts throughout the entire novel. Like, even the Witch of the Waste is out for personal gain. Like, she wants to. Yep. What was the way that you put it, Nat? She wanted to create the perfect man out of 3 different bodies.
Yeah, that's a spoiler alert if you haven't read the novel, but it's okay. It was published in 1986. If you haven't read it yet, you can go die in a fire. No, just kidding. Just read the book. But the Witch of the Waste's aim in the whole point of the story is that she wants to combine the 3 perfect men in her mind into one man.
Yeah, so this is like a small picture goal, and it remains small, and it's really, really, and the reason why I think I really like about Howl's Moving Castle is that it's unapologetic about the fact that it is remaining small scale, and almost kind of quaint, like it's not ashamed of doing that. Mm-hmm. Whereas while there's nothing large, like a large epic plot or story, sometimes women I find are pressured in certain types of writing to write a bigger picture because they're told, interpersonal stuff is amateur or
that domestic films where the main character is a seamstress who cooks and cleans and takes care of her sorcerer husband. It's boring and it's not strong or compelling.
Yeah, and and another thing where the 2 books differ is so Sarkhan and Howl as the trope of the sorcerer husband. I mean, they're both fussy, difficult men who love beautiful things. That's true.
No, they're very concerned about their appearances.
Yeah, but I mean, I think in my personal opinion, I think that's where the similarities between them end. Like Sarkhan is bitter and caustic, and he's like almost OCD in his cleanliness. And Howl is this very flighty creature and incredibly messy. And while he can have like these really nice quips, like these really almost sarcastic quips, he strikes me as almost kind of childlike. And
Sarkhan's more of an old man.
Yeah.
And can I just interject here with another point from the book is the fact that, again, spoiler alert, one of the things about Howl in the book is that he is actually from our world, our physical human world that happened to land into this magical world. And he's had to find his way up from that. And part of that is obviously making a deal with Calcifer. No spoilers there because you've watched the movie, I'm sure. But the idea is that he is young. He's only like 29, I think, in canon. And he is relatively inexperienced. He chases after ladies with his glowing good looks that, he like spends an hour or so. Well, actually, I think Calcifer is like, you'll know he really loves you because he doesn't spend 2 to 3 hours in the bathroom every day to come and get you. And that's the end of the book is like Hal shows up all bedraggled with like a unshaven face and she's like, oh, he really loves me because that's how he is. Like young men tend to like focus on the appearances as being the most important part of their personality, which is like, no.
I thought that another similarity, I guess, and maybe it's a bit abstract, but like the dragon, like neither of them like want to commit. They're both afraid of commitment. Absolutely. And they're both afraid to care. And obviously Howl's got this relationship with Calcifer where Calcifer is his heart or something.
Yeah.
And in Uprooted, Sarkhan is eventually forced to drink from the spindle. The spindle is like the water source, the source of life in the valley, and he's always been like the reason he abducts. That, right? Yeah, he's always been avoidant of that, and that's the reason that he abducts those girls, or doesn't abduct them, but he takes them as tribute, is because he needs something of the valley to draw as sort of a channel for his magic if he wants to combat the wood, and if he wants to sort of use the valley's magic to protect it, he has to draw on an energy source that is of the valley, but he's afraid to drink from the spindle water, like literally afraid to drink the water.
He doesn't want to be attached. It's the whole commitment
he doesn't want to be attached, and he doesn't want to drink the water because when he drinks the water, he will be attached and he will be committed.
That's a really wonderful connection between those 2 books, actually, and the trope itself, because I think a lot of it is like you have this creature that's from a different realm, a different dimension, and the whole point is that they are tied back to the earth. They're tied back to the place that they did not want to be part of, and they're made human because of it. And the female force in these stories is always the humanizing force, right? The one that teaches them that life is as simple and boring as it is important and special. And they haven't quite gotten that sort of tether to that.
Yeah, and both Sophie and Agnieszka in the end sort of demand from them, like, you need to stop being a flighty, flaky asshole and care about me.
Yeah.
shoot. And it's just like, I think the one thing it's a little bit shallow of me. I prefer Howl to Sarkin, and I have to admit part of this has to do with his looks.
Just because Sarkin's not described.
Yeah, actually, it's true.
Well, I can
mean,
imagine it. It's a self-insert.
That's the thing. I saw some like gift set on Tumblr that had some model, like that somewhat fit the description. Like he's like frowning and has black hair or whatever. So I was like, that that could be Sarkin for me. So I've just seen that guy ever since I saw that edit.
Yeah,
but
you can't unsee like the beautiful anime-haired, poor man
right
crying over the fact that like Sophie switched his hair dyes and so he's got red hair now and he feels he's ugly.
Well, the other thing too is the really interesting thing about Howl's Moving Castle, at least my copy of it, it's illustrated.
Oh,
so it has
really?
pictures of Howl in it.
I need to buy that.
Which is really cool. But like, even if there wasn't illustrations of it, like Diana Wynne Jones does a really good job in physically describing how the characters in her book looks. And what I really like is that she gives as much care and attention to the secondary characters as she does to the main characters. Like she describes everyone with about the same amount of care, which is really, really nice. It makes the story feel more fleshed out.
Yeah, it's a sign of a really talented writer, which she is. She's a very prolific writer too.
And in terms of how Howl's Moving Castle relates to domestic fantasy, I think it is a prime example of the domestic fantasy genre because it deals with the minutiae of Sophie's everyday life, and it remains quaint. Like I already talked about how it remains quaint, but I think the final battle in Howl's Moving Castle, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the final battle happens around the dinner table, and the weapons that are being used are a walking cane and a frying pan. Mm-hmm. and they basically, after it's done and resolved, everyone like kisses and makes up, sits down to have tea, right? And another reason why Howl's Moving Castle, the book form, not the movie, I should specify that too, is a prime example of domestic fantasy, is that it's unapologetically written for the female gaze, in that it explicitly focuses on the domestic and emotional labor of women, both the positive side of it and the negative side of it. And what I took from the story, people will take different things from different stories, especially when it comes to specific genres. But what I took from the story was that it's explicitly talking. For me, it seemed the story was talking about how all of us, especially women, are all looking for a little magic in our lives, and how we get stuck how we're frustrated by the fact that we're stuck cleaning up after the men in our lives, both for literal and proverbial messes. That was
no, I think you make a really good point. So like women are socialized and raised to be expected to contribute to domestic labor, right? Like we all are going to probably have had Thanksgiving already, but the whole idea is that the women are in the kitchen preparing the meal and then cleaning up after it. The men are in the living room watching football. And that is, to me, is like the epitome of what we are born into. But the fact that like the best stuff happens in the kitchen, I'm sorry, but like we kind of get the better of the deal. Like I'm not stuck watching Hand Egg for like 3 hours.
Football makes my fucking brain bleed.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I also think
green bean casserole any day.
Yeah. Give me easy access to any appetizers for like 2 hours straight. I'm gonna have a fucking good time. But
yeah, also the wine's in the kitchen.
Yeah, that's why we stay there.
True. That's true.
And gossip. And everything else that comes with being a woman, which is what is, and again, with the whole domestic fantasy aspect of it, is, again, it's a very underrated genre. Like, it's always been present in fantasy and folklore from the beginning of time because that's what we dealt with, and that's the stories that we told around the campfire or around the kitchen or around wherever we were. And they made sense to us because we had existed in those realms. But at the same token, when you try to introduce those to a mass audience or maybe a 50-50 female-male audience, males tend to run away and go watch football.
I was going to say another thing that is really interesting about Howl's Moving Castle is, so this whole idea of women are getting frustrated by the stuff that they're cleaning up after men in their life, I think this is typified by Howl himself, who, while he ends up adoring Sophie, he's really just looking for a mother figure to clean up after him and take care of him.
He's just like throwing fits, like emotional tantrums.
So, what did you guys not like about the book?
Not much. I think the thing I liked probably, see, I really liked the book in whole and in general, 'cause, I mean, as you can tell from what we've been saying so far, but I guess didn't like The Witch of the Waste as much as I liked the Wood Queen from Uprooted. And I
I
think
agree with that.
yeah, and I think this is because despite her alienness, the Wood Queen felt like a fully fleshed out character. Like she felt real, right? And she had motivation behind what she was doing. And despite the terrible things she was doing and like the monstrosity of what she'd become, you could empathize with her decision making. Like it made like she was nuanced, right?
Yeah, and it made a strong point to outline like why she became that way and what happened to her. Whereas with the Witch of the Waste, you don't get so much of a backstory.
Yeah, and like I found like I found the way that the Witch of the Waste the way she was written was she was just the antagonist, like, and she was never explored, as you just mentioned, right? And the conflict with her fades to background noise, like you never get any sort of insight into what she is doing, besides the fact that she is trying to create the perfect man from three men. So it's not really enough, I guess, in order to really get that across.
Yeah.
Yeah, she doesn't actually have a backstory to herself at all, There's even more of a backstory around the mentor that taught Howl and the other wizard, Suleiman, in the books. So it's like they just kind of eliminate her character as being anything but kind of obsessed and... Yeah.
Her character is I'm obsessed with Howl, basically.
Yeah, and there's that whole introduction of her like fire demon. Is that what it was, Shy? I haven't read it recently, but
yeah, she's got a fire demon as well, who's basically this has taken on the form of another woman almost, or something.
Yeah,
it was a little bit confusing for me even rereading it. But the fire demon is a little bit older, much more powerful than I almost said Castiel from Supernatural. Like what the fuck? Oh my god,
You've been reading that like Destiel fic lately?
I'm sorry. No, I quit after season 5. I dropped the series, but she's got her own fire demon. But even that's not really the fire demon itself is explored more than the Witch of the Waste. It's just I don't know. It wasn't. I didn't hate it, but it also wasn't satisfying.
Yeah, I don't think it was I honestly don't think it was even the primary source of conflict in the novel at all.
No.
And the film actually underlines that quite a bit because she just becomes kind of a doddering old lady that, with their little dog.
She just joins their little band of rejects.
Yep.
It's true. She does. She sits in her little wheelchair back there. Or was it even like a wheelchair? Or is it one of those little sets there that she got a little blanket over her shoulders too. Mm-hmm. Other than that, though, I think it was a fairly good book, and I do agree on the fact that the Witch of the Waste wasn't actually the main conflict. I would almost say it was maybe Sophie's internal commiseration.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
just her reconciling her own feelings and self-perception, I think.
Absolutely. I don't think that there's a single thing that I don't like about this book. Now that I'm thinking about it, like everything is. It was just kind of one of those perfect reads back when I was in college. Mm-hmm. And especially around, I don't think we discussed this yet, but I especially liked her stepmom and her sisters. And
yeah,
I love, it's kind of sometimes really kind of cutesy and fluffy to have like a pairing for every sister, but I absolutely adored it.
Yeah, I think it was...
What did you call that trope, Nat? Like 7 husbands for 7 brides?
It's a musical, 7 brides for 7 brothers. Yeah, it is like one of the worst ones, but I grew up watching it. It's hilarious. And nowadays it would be deemed completely problematic because 7 brothers go out in the snow and steal all these girls from their families and then take them and get snowed in for the winter, and then everybody falls in love. It's just, it's like,
oh my god!
Can you imagine the Tumblr discourse on that?
I don't want to.
No. Okay, yeah. Extremely problematic 50s musical. No, I love it so much though. But yeah, the whole trope of like, so she pairs Michael and Martha and Letty and Suleiman, or Justin Sullivan. He is also from our world, like Howl was, and was taught by the same mentor, but he's like the king's magician, right? And he actually gets turned into a dog, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So I think the dog in the film was supposed to be a thinly veiled version of him, but he never turns back into a human. And said they made the scarecrow Justin. So yeah. Anyway.
Should we talk about the movie now?
Actually, Erin, do you have anything you don't like about it though?
I haven't read the book in over 10 years, so I need to reread it, but yeah, so no, I don't have anything to add.
All right, let's go right into the anime. So as we introduced before, released in 2004, and Shai, you had some really good points about the time and place that it was actually released in and kind of the zeitgeist that fueled Miyazaki's take on this story.
Yeah. So we've already talked about who made the anime and who it was directed by, and the fact that it was award winning. And even though we've also talked in very general terms about how it really differs from the book in terms of subtext. And despite that differing, I think it's still one of my personal favorite anime to this day.
Yeah.
And so it's been changed, but it's not a better change, but it's a good change. It's a different sort of good.
And Studio Ghibli always just turns out gold.
They really do, and they shit gold, man.
I have yet to see a bad movie from them.
And this was one of my favorite movies from them because it was more adult, I guess.
Yeah.
It's one of the more mature ones.
Yeah, and you can really see how Howl's Moving Castle changes from the female perspective of Diana Wynne Jones to the perspective of me with my names.
Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah, there we go. And so instead of sticking with the small minutiae of Sophie's everyday life, as Diana did with the book, the plot becomes much grander. It's set against this backdrop of war with another kingdom. And instead of simply searching for a missing prince who has been cursed by a witch, Howl is tasked and recruited as a war wizard eventually, right?
Yeah, he's just trying to run from it as he was in
like
the
a dragon.
Yep. And we also lose within the movie. We also lose this domestic fantasy element, as well as the book's explicitly feminine gaze. Instead, the anime explores really, really explicitly anti-war subtext. That Miyazaki himself has directly said himself was a direct commentary on the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And we also lose the commentary on emotional labor. And Sophie's curse turns into a commentary on the benefits of old age. And I pulled the general Wikipedia summary for this. And I know people shit on Wikipedia for a lot of different reasons. And I can totally
It's okay.
understand.
You don't have to do a disclaimer. We're always going to use Wikipedia.
I know. But the reason I want to preface this, especially since we're really early into the number of shows that we've used, is that the reason why I quote Wikipedia is just because it's accessible for everyone to just access. It's accessible for people to access and to just go look it up themselves, right? Yeah. So basically, Miyazaki stated when he was asked about why he made this film, stated that he had a great deal of rage about the Iraq War, which led him to make a film which he felt would be poorly received in the U.S. In 2013, Miyazaki said the film was his favorite creation, explaining, "I wanted to convey the message that life is worth living, and I don't think that's changed. The movie is thematically significantly different from the book. While the book focuses on challenging class and gender norms, the film focuses on love and personal loyalty and the destructive effects of war. That in mind, I think it's important to note that both the book and the movie contain a love story. But I actually think there's a point to be made here in that the romance was ramped up in the movie.
Yeah, it was very much so a love story.
It was really ramped up. Like in the books, the love story between Howl and Sophie is kind of like it's a slow building thing, and it's like a subtle thing, and it doesn't really come into effect until the very end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the movie, the romance between them is really explicit, and it's like to the point where they're almost kind of saved by their love for each other.
I feel like it's explicit. Like I feel like it's pretty one-sided in the movie though for a long time because Howl doesn't really come around to it until the very end.
Yeah. I think he loves her, but he's just very stoic about it. And I think that they kind of upped his inhumanity, right? They made him a little bit more of this like magical creature that cannot be tamed.
Right.
Yeah. And that said, too, I also want to say, and I mean, I've mentioned it before, but not in detail, that even though the subtext has changed significantly from book to movie, I think it's a very respectful adaptation of the book because I guess the changes to the narrative were an homage instead of like the changes made sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like sometimes when you get a book to movie translation and they make changes, it doesn't make sense at all why they did that, except for, maybe shock value, for example. I won't rant about it too much right now, but it's a really good example where from book to movie, Game of Thrones, right? Or the TV series where they had Sansa raped instead of, Jane Poole. Like there was that makes no sense narratively wise why they did that, right?
They just wanted the shock.
They just wanted the shock value. So you get stuff like that all the time happening from book to movie, and there's changes here too, but the changes that Miyazaki made for Howl's Moving Castle, with the anime, they make sense, and I consider it to be a highly successful piece of actually transformative fiction because it's not the same. Like I wouldn't call it straight up fan fiction, but it's like
I was wondering if you were
I was about ready to use that word. Alternate universe fan fiction.
It's an alternate universe of the version, right? Like, where things slightly go sideways, right? So I think it is a piece. I think it is a prime example of transformative fiction and what you can do with transformative fiction. And I highly recommend that people watch the anime and read the book just to see that translation,
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to get good things out of both of them. So was there anything that you didn't like about the movie?
My first thought was, I was thinking like when Shai was talking about the war narrative, I thought like obviously the war was really explicit in the movie, but you never really get like a backstory for it. You don't learn anything about the kingdom that they're fighting or how the war is going other than, it's bad and lots of people are suffering because war is inherently damaging. But so I was thinking, maybe I would like to know more about that greater conflict because it felt like conflict for the sake of conflict. It sort of felt like just senseless conflict. Like it didn't really have an explanation, but I guess that's probably the point Miyazaki was trying to make. Probably how he felt about the war in Iraq. So, just that it was senseless and pointless. So I'm cool with that now.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a little bit more sense in that context. I did not know that until Shai pointed that out.
Yeah.
Know that he thought that.
Well, his films are always like explicitly anti-war, like that is that's a really long-standing major running theme with everything that he's created, and that's fine too. I would have to say for myself, again, it is one of my favorite animated features of all time, so I have very little criticism about it. I guess I would say I wish the female gaze hadn't been stripped so much because while Sophie is still the main character and you're still following her, it's not written from a feminine gaze, like from the female perspective, like it translates differently. There's a kind of like a wall or like it feels a bit more distant from Sophie and what she is worried about, right? So, and that just happens basically with male writers when they're writing female characters, and it's because they can't exactly put themselves into the woman's shoes, no matter how adept they are at writing, and I was a little bit sad to see that go, but again, this is a really minor quibble, it's not that much.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think Miyazaki and Ghibli together, they've consistently made stories with female heroines, similarly to Disney, but they're very much stripped of any kind of feminine sexuality or gaze. A lot of the time, they're typically very neutered in the sense that, they'll have a little bit of romance, but it'll be so subtle that you won't really feel like it's kind of driving anything. So
yeah, it's never the focus, and the movies are always kind of vanilla too. So.
Yeah, and the thing I've always found interesting about these films, and that kind of, from a Western perspective, it's a lot difficult to kind of handle. Your brain just wants to go, where's the plot? But the stories typically kind of, they just always kind of just go along and ramble and then kind of peter out. There's never really, to me, all the Miyazaki films seem to end on this very like, there might be some kind of conflict and denouement and anything, but like they just kind of like end, like everything's good, everything's fine, and then the main crisis.
I think Princess Mononoke is my favorite, like for that reason. I think it had the most conflict-driven plot, but I won't go out on that tangent.
No, absolutely, I agree with you completely. Yeah, I'm more thinking of stuff like Spirited Away, which we'll talk about soon.
Even Spirited Away, I think, had more going on than like Ponyo or Nausicaa.
Yeah.
Ponyo. Well, isn't that the one about the goldfish though?
Yes.
Okay. What do you expect with a story about a goldfish, Aaron?
Like I don't expect anything more than what they did, and I love what they did. I love Studio Ghibli, but it's definitely different from Western storytelling.
Absolutely. I like the cultural differences and the shifts. It's never about like one like specific good or evil thing. Everything always has nuance, and sometimes there's not even evil in the films, which is great because kids don't really necessarily need to be taught that life is conflict.
Right, and I watched those films more for the adorable creatures that he creates.
Oh my god, yes.
The soot sprites. Oh my god.
Oh my god. Yeah, I've considered getting a tattoo of those because I love that so much.
Yeah, I've thought about getting a Kodama tattoo. I guess he didn't invent those, but yeah, they're cute.
Or a no face Kaunashi. So
Yes.
yeah. All right. I think we can move on into talking about Spirited Away, right? Because it's one of our recommendations.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we're going to go into our recommendation section, and all three of us have some recs that are based on the Sorcerer Husband trope or in the domestic fantasy vibe. But before we begin that, we kind of all came up to the same recommendation. So that would be Spirited Away. It was released in 2001, and it's very much in the vein of Howl's Moving Castle. So
We should specify that's also Studio Ghibli.
oh yeah. And just
so that
to,
might have a little bit to play in, a little bit of the reason why it plays into that.
yeah, and so to preface this, I wanted to say that I went to Japan in 2001. It was my homestay for 6 weeks, and it happened to be in the theaters at the time, and also coming out on DVD. And I was able to purchase the DVD on the streets in Japan and get like a little fake musubi like with it. It was one of those moments.
Did you go to the Studio Ghibli Museum when you were in Japan?
No, I didn't. No, I was in Nagoya and Kyoto, so I wasn't.
Oh, okay.
I was anywhere near it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's outside of Tokyo, so I got to go, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I bet. I would love to go back and visit that specifically. So if you haven't seen Spirited Away, which is the original Japanese name is Sen to Chihiro no Kamikakushi, and it's Sen and Chihiro's being spirited away by the gods, basically. Kami is god in Japanese. It's basically a sort of Japanese take on the Alice in Wonderland trope, but also it's a little bit more a story about a girl saving her parents and also just kind of dealing with forces outside of her control. In the movie, Chihiro goes into an abandoned theme park and her parents follow her, are turned into pigs because they eat the food of the gods, and then she is enslaved by the witch Yubaba and made to work in this bathhouse that serves all of these gods and spirits. It's
Baba Yaga.
Yeah, Baba Yaga. She always shows up, doesn't she?
She does. She's in everything we consume.
Yeah. And the reason this movie charmed me so much was it didn't shy away from having this kind of like complex relationship with the different characters. You know, all of the accessory characters have really interesting like facets to them, whether it's like No Face or Haku. Actually having a dragon husband in this story was, I mean, I was tickled pink. I loved it so much.
Cute.
Yeah.
So I'm going to recommend another Studio Ghibli film called Whispers of the Heart, and it's lesser known.
It's my favorite. Oh my god.
What?
Sorry, it's my favorite. I didn't know you were wrecking that. I'm gonna cry. Oh. God, I watched that in the theater and when I was in high school, and I fucking died. I love that movie so much.
Yeah, and it's lesser known, I think, because it is very domestic. It doesn't contain any. It's not fantasy at all, whereas most of the films that come out of that studio are heavy in the fantasy elements, but this one it's just very domestic and very.
But what about the cat? The cat's pretty magical.
Oh yeah, the cat is magical.
And they made a sequel. Did you watch the sequel to it?
No, I haven't seen the sequel. I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, there's a whole sequel about the cat.
Oh my god.
In the cat world, and they're all dressed up like little aristocats, you know. It's so cute. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a very modern setting, sort of slice of life, but it's about a girl who's a writer and she's in high school and she's sort of a bookworm, and she discovers that the books she's checking out from the library have all been previously read by this pompous asshole, Seiji, who basically holds his, you know, he at first sort of treats her like a nuisance and like he's smarter than her and he's read everything she's read already and he knows everything, you know, she does already. But she gets to know him and finds out that he wants to be a violin maker like his grandfather. And I really like that aspect of his characterization, as he's just sort of a soft boy that likes to play music ultimately and wants to make violins. And his honing of his artistic craft sort of inspires her to really chase her writing, and they fall in love, and it's really cute.
It is so fucking cute. I think it's one of the best love stories ever committed to anime. Well, except for I haven't seen Your Name yet, and I've heard that's really good. And it's got a great cover of John Denver, so.
Anything to add on the Whispers of the Heart, Nat, or did I cover it all right?
No, you covered it pretty well. Yeah, that was one of my favorites growing up, just because of the relationship between the two and how they kind of grow to be, you know, friends, and then, you know,
they inspire each other.
Exactly. It's so precious.
Yeah, and I love the art in that one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's cute.
Yeah, there's some really beautiful just straight Japanese hillside city views. It's just really beautiful in that sense. All right, Steve, do you have it?
Well, that's my recommendation.
That was the only one? Okay. All right. Shai, do you want to go next?
Sure. I've got 2 recommendations. The first one is, I'm going to butcher this name again because once again, I'm terrible with names. So I'm going to recommend this super popular manga called Kami-sama Hajimashita. Okay.
Kami-sama Hajimemashita.
There we go. Thank God. Yeah, apologies, everyone. Unfortunately, I will never be able to pronounce names of any sort properly again.
It's okay.
The main character's name is Naomi, and essentially what happens in the story is her father disappears, leaving her with massive amounts of debt. And in response to this, she is chased out of her house by debt collectors for a brief period of time and ends up homeless. And while wandering around town, she meets a man being chased by a dog who offers to give her a house so long as she takes care of that house. And Naomi agrees. And when she arrives at the house, she discovers it's a shrine instead. And by taking care of this house, she inadvertently becomes the god of that shrine and awakens her indebted familiar. Oh God, help me with the names again, guys. Tomoe, who is basically this extremely powerful fox spirit who resents being bound to her as a servant, and he rightly believes that she has not earned his fealty. And over the course of the story, she gets him to open up to her through her domestic prowess, which is why this falls into the domestic fantasy genre and the Sorcerer Husband genre. And as she takes care of him and the shrine, he slowly falls in love with her. And I think in later chapters of the story of the anime of the manga, they were actually going to get married. I mean, it's an anime too, but I haven't seen the anime. And to be honest with you, I actually stopped reading the series because while I really love the beginning arcs of the story, and I do recommend the beginning, I think that the story came to its natural conclusion, and then the author kept writing past that point, and it's become I think it's jumped the shark a bit, so it's become kind of like so I recommend reading up to a certain point, where they finally have resolution from all this conflict and angst between the two of them, right? Where you find out the history between the two of them. And then that's it. That's as far as I recommend reading. And the last recommendation I have is actually the 2015 film adaptation of Cinderella, featuring Lily James as Cinderella, Cate Blanchett as the evil stepmother, and
is that the one with Rob Stark?
Richard Madden, yes, the young wolf from Game of Thrones. He's the prince. And Helena Bonham Carter also plays the fairy godmother.
Oh, I loved her in that.
So, I feel I should. So this Cinderella, the story of Cinderella veers very close to that fairy tale princess subgenre of stories. But I would argue that Cinderella is one of the original domestic fantasy stories, or a proto version of it. Because it has a lot of similar elements that you see in all of the domestic fantasy stories. For example, a small-scale plot explicitly focused around romance, everyday tasks such as cooking and cleaning that are infused with magic, a young girl or a woman being exploited through domestic labor. She is then whisked away to a castle or tower through magic to meet a beautiful man who, initially somewhat cold, becomes attentive to her once he realizes her goodness. And the antagonist is a more powerful, older woman who has been spurred by love throughout the story. So that's why I think it fits into that genre. And I think the adaptation is a very enjoyable movie. I had low expectations for it because, again, it's an adaptation. And it kind of looked a little bit like blockbuster candy.
I had really low expectations, but I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would.
Yeah, same here. It had really great pacing, and it was really expertly acted. It was so enjoyable. And just this...
I loved that they really fleshed out... Is the Cinderella prince named Prince Charming, or is that Snow White? What's the name of the Cinderella prince?
I can't remember what they called him.
I don't remember his name either. He's probably named in this. Let me look at it.
I'm gonna look that up. I need to know.
Yeah, but Cate Blanchett was great as the evil stepmother.
Yeah, she was.
The one critique I had was, while their costuming was really well done, it was also all over the map in terms of style, in this really weird way. But other than that, though, I actually really enjoyed it, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy it. So I definitely recommend watching that movie.
Yeah, his name is literally Prince.
It's Prince Charming. I just looked.
Oh my God.
Oh God.
The Prince. Well, it's a light movie. It's not really that, in depth there. So,
it's pretty good for popcorn, I think. It's really great. They've got a great cast, and I think that they make it fun, and they give a lot more nuanced and interesting parts to Ella. Like, they make her a little bit more, as usual with all, adaptations that happen now, the woman is more empowered, so.
Mm-hmm. And I love that Prince Charming had daddy issues.
Yeah, you rarely see that, right? Like,
always with the daddy issues.
so I have 2 recommendations, and the first one is one I found on Goodreads. It's probably one of those young adult books that everybody's read, but I had not. It's called Heart's Blood by Juliette Marlier, published in 2009, and it's basically a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but it's set in a sort of a historical alternate universe of Middle Ages Ireland. In the story, the main character, Catrin, is a scribe, and she's escaping an abusive household. And she finds herself at a haunted castle, basically. And the haunted castle has a secretive lord named Anluin, who is very dry and mean, and he is got daddy issues too, really bad daddy issues. And he also was basically disfigured by an illness when he was young, so he's very self-conscious of his appearance and very, kind of lurking in the shadows, Phantom of the Opera style, but not,
Poto strikes again.
Yeah. He's kind of a fucking jerk, which is because I think he's just so used to people discriminating against him. So she plays that really well between him and Catrin. Catrin is smart and, very well organized. I'm sure you appreciate it because she's actually basically rescribing his entire library, including his Anluin's father's notes. And Anluin's father is I've heard somebody describe him as a Marquis de Sade figure, which is pretty fucking fascinating, but I'll let you discover that for yourself. Basically, in this story, there is no magic spell that's going to make Anluin not a jerk and, basically, quote unquote ugly, because obviously he's hot. Because he's a great guy, right? Girls don't give a shit about appearances typically. I mean, we do, but not to the level that dudes do. But yeah, the way that they kind of, come to trust each other and fall in love, and the way that Catrin basically faces off the main antagonist, and I'm not going to spoil that for you, is just really beautiful. And it's kind of a more mature, interesting story. And there is sex. So yeah. Who'da thunk? Especially in this setting. But yeah, you'll love it. My second rec is going to be the 1992 Baz Luhrmann film, Strictly Ballroom. So if you're familiar with Baz Luhrmann, he came out with the wonderful Romeo and Juliet in the 90s, Moulin Rouge. He's basically got just some over-the-top storytelling and visual direction, which has always been great. But Strictly Ballroom was actually his first film, and it's a very weird, madcap, romantic comedy. And the setting is that apparently Baz Luhrmann studied ballroom dance when he was younger and wanted to make a movie about it.
He went to Cotillion.
Yeah. He was basically in classes for it, and it's just one of those things, and it's in the early 90s, so it's over the top. Everybody's hair is crazy and, bright neon colors. In it, basically, there's this handsome, hot-headed young guy named Scott Hastings, and he's a child of ballroom dancers who basically failed and are now teaching. And his dad is been scarred for life by the fact that he failed in this ballroom dancing routine and when he was younger, so his dad just sits around watching old ballroom dancing tapes. It's really adorable. It's just it's one of those surrealist movies where you don't really have to take it too seriously, sort of like a Terry Gilliam film in that sense. But anyway, so his partner quits on him and his mother is a bitch. And so he decides to take up a new partner in a student whose name is Fran. And she's the epitome of just the normal. She considers herself ugly, obviously, because she's just kind of dressed in sweatpants and has glasses and frizzy hair and is always dancing with another woman because they can't get her a partner. She just looks like she's suffering, or she just doesn't care, which is kind of nice. She's got that kind of personality where she's very shy, and when she starts dancing with him, she's obviously terrified. But the transformation that happens because of their dancing together is more of a transformation for him than her. Of course, they have the whole taking off the glasses and becoming beautiful moment, but it's really not that big of a difference from who she is when she's not dolled up. She teaches him about, he basically finds out that she's Spanish, and this is set in Australia, I should have mentioned too, because Baz Luhrmann's Australian, but Fran's father teaches him the paso doble, and they dance it together, which is kind of unheard of in ballroom dancing, and it's just it's a really cute movie, and I like that whole going from kind of the nerdy awkward girl to the fucking femme fatale, but also just retaining that part of yourself that's very domestic in a sense, Yeah. It's good for that. I think it's a good story of that transformation. So Now for our very favorite part of the episode, we are going to go into our confession session. This is where we have questions for each other that we don't know about in advance, and we're going to ask them of each other. So I will ask questions to Shy first, if that's all right.
That is fine.
And
I'm bracing myself.
These questions are obviously created by Erin. Prepare yourself for sinning. All right. Tell me how you would rewrite Agnieszka's sex scene with Sarkin.
Well, for one, there'd be more than one sex scene.
Yes.
There'd be way more lead up to that sex scene. There would be more foreplay because there's like almost nothing at the moment.
Yeah, she just kind of climbs on top of him.
She's kind of climbs on top of him.
I
in
did
the
love
bed.
that, though.
I did too. I like
when
I like how she took
the right girl on top.
Yeah, I like how she took initiative, which was really great. I would keep that. I guess I would say we have to have a scene where they fuck hard and dirty against the wall. That would be
in the library with books falling down.
Exactly, with books falling down, right? Potions falling everywhere. That reminds me, we should also have one where they do it on the table. What else? See, they do all sorts of kinky magic shit too, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we could do something really kinky with vines.
I think there are only like 27 Uprooted fanfics, but there's some good smut.
Dude, they should do something really kinky with like vines because they both sprout vines out of their fucking hands. So,
or the basement with the chains. So, yeah.
That too, right? So, yeah, in general, I would say that we need more sex scenes, more foreplay, more lead up to those sex scenes, something against the wall, something with vines, something with chains. There we go.
There we
go.
My
answer.
And no fade to black.
No fade to black.
No fucking fade to black. That's another big fucking thing I hated about it.
It's like people can't orgasm in books, apparently.
It's not kosher, Nat. Shh.
Okay, sorry. I'm just a little bit burnt about that. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, of course you could ask.
I like Erin's questions. If you were the Witch of the Wastes, tell me what you would do differently to win Howl's heart.
To win Howl's heart?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's actually pretty darn simple because he's a really, really simple guy to understand. You don't chase him. Like he chases women. The thing that we didn't talk about it, but the thing that Howl does, like he wants the women to love him and he loves pampering them. So he chases them. And the minute the woman shows affection with him or tries to chase him back,
he's over it.
Yeah.
He's over it, right? So
we've all met that guy.
God.
Literally, all you have to do is make sure that you're pretty enough that he falls in love with you, right? And then don't play hard to get. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do to get him after you.
Yeah, that's true. You just have to pretend like you don't notice him and ignore him.
Yeah, pretend you don't give a shit.
Exactly. Yeah. Dudes, why did dudes do that? Oh.
Oldest trick in the book.
God damn it. So frustrating. Yeah. All right. That's a good one. So Erin, did you want to go next?
Yep, I've got a question for you, Nat, from courtesy of Cheyenne. When the anime rendition of Howl's Moving Castle was released, all of us were in high school and weebs of the First Order. High school is a time of exploration, a time when lustful fantasies translate into writing highly inaccurate sex scenes on fanfiction.net. If you were into Howl's Moving Castle at the time, what was the raunchiest fantasy you had about Howl? Did you ever write fic about him? And if you didn't, how would you write it now?
Oh my god, that's a good one. I was actually in college. It was my second year, which is even better.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It actually contextualizes a little bit more for me. And I think the shape-shifting aspect of Howl is both in the film and in the book, but mostly I think in the film, especially when he turns into that huge bird creature. You know?
I love when dudes turn into birds.
Me too. I like birds. I'm not sexually attracted to birds, but
I like how we set the precedent that we have to clarify.
We have to clarify that that's not my kink. But
we're all monster fuckers.
Yeah, I would take that aspect of it and play it up, and also have Sophie learning shape-changing stuff and have wizard battles. But yeah, the hot sex would have to come from them just kind of I don't know. I think he's such a pretty boy. You kind of want to mess him up, make him all dirty.
Yeah, get him dirty.
Yeah.
Question about this, about the shape shifting.
Yeah.
So Howl could technically turn himself into everything, right?
Mm-hmm. And
could he turn himself into a vibrator? That's what I want to know.
I'm sure he could magic something up. The only thing is that you have Calcifer in the house, so you'd have to go find someplace else where you're not being watched by the little fighter,
Oh God,
like the little demon.
Calcifer would know.
Yeah,
Calcifer would
he
know.
would
It would be an
know.
OT3.
Yeah. Oh dear, no, I don't know if I can handle that. Oh yeah, Calcifer is.
You know what he would say to that? I'm being exploited.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't want to exploit the demon. Yeah, but yeah, I would probably actually. I think I still might possibly. I don't know about writing Howl's Moving Castle fanfic, but definitely Uprooted fanfic because the gears are turning. So yeah, that was a great question.
There's one of the themes I've seen in the with the Uprooted fanfics is people write missing scenes. So what did Sarkin do when he went back to his room after their little sexual magic interaction?
Yeah. And they've got that whole link for their magic. So he's thinking of her, and he's it's always he's thinking of her, he's feeling her, and then he's masturbating, right? Seriously, that's the one I read on there. The other one I read, they fucked in that tree home or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Too much information. I love fic. But yeah, they definitely need more magical fucking. That's gonna be that's just put that on my headstone.
All right then. So I'm reading your questions to Aaron. All right then. Aaron, you are tasked with writing fanfic for Uprooted since there's only 2 on AO3, but you have to incorporate a kink not suitable for life. Actual dragon dick, wood tentacles, DDLG, which is or something else. Monkey wrench is blood kink is too tame, so you can't listen.
Yeah, I had to throw in the caveat, Aaron, that you couldn't just say blood kink.
So basically, just write a kink that is not a good kink.
It's just one that that would make your grandma faint.
Okay, a kink that would make my grandmother faint. Well, my grandmother. Never mind. I'm not gonna say that. Trying to think thematically. I'm not creative with kinks. I'm just really not. This is why I don't write smut, because I'm bad at it.
No, you're not. You're not bad at smut.
You've never read any smut I've written.
That's true. Yeah, but I bet you're not bad at smut.
I don't know. Sorry,
Okay,
I'm gonna
make this easy for you. Actual dragon dick or wood tentacles. Choose wisely.
Oh my god. I guess tentacles.
Yeah, that seems like the safer choice, right?
Yeah.
So now on to where you can find us. You can find me, Nat, at Ashes for Foxes. That's like portions for foxes, but with ashes instead. And that's on Twitter or on Tumblr.
You can find me, Erin, on Twitter or Tumblr as at Holocroning.
And you can find me, Shy, aka Otzi, blogging at Otzi.com, spelled OHTZE.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Otzi_O, spelled the same way.
And you can find all of us at Metamashina.com, spelled METAMASHINA.com. Follow us on Twitter at Metamashina or on Tumblr at Metamashina. And if you have any questions for the hosts, feel free to send those to contact@metamashina.com. And so, guys, what are we going to do for our sign-off?
Goodbye and farewell. I hope to see you soon.
I just have the temptation to sing Country Road by John Denver now.
Please sing Country Road.
All right then. One.
Country
No, I can't.
Road.
Take me home,
Take me home
to the place,
to the place
I belong.
I belong.
West Virginia,
West Virginia.
Mountain Mama,
Mountain Mama.
take
Take me home.
Country
Country roads.